At that time, Hans Marius Grosvold was in media a lot, being the lawyer for Joshua French, who was imprisoned in Congo, accused for murder. And as for all speakers, I'm curious about the person behind, and I had to find out what led him to be a famous lawyer. Maybe it was the relatable in the growing up with artistic parents who don't necessarily know their own best, and the wish to help, or maybe the perspective of the world and people. He's the son of a father in a skilled musician in a band who was always on the road, and he's a musician himself, playing guitar and banjo. Hans Marius has a creative background, and all I can say is that with us today we have a person who is a lawyer for all the right reasons, and with a drive, life experience, and perspective that just deserves the deepest respect. Today he will talk about a topic that many of us find quite scary, which is copyright. Because Hans Marius has a great reputation as one of Norway's best lawyers within his specialist fields, copyright and privacy law. For over 2 decades, he has been the go-to lawyer for both individual artists and composers and their organizations. He has been legal counsel for NOPA and their members for many years. In his talk, Creative Copyright, Game Music Do's and Don'ts, he will offer essential insight into music copyright and how to write and negotiate contracts between game producers and music composers. Please give a warm welcome to Hans Marius Grosvold.
Thank you. And hopefully this is on. Is it? Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sarah. And in case you're nervous about why a defense attorney is here to talk about copyright, it's because as Sarah mentioned, I've been working mostly within culture and for artists over the last actually well over 20 years now. And what I do is I work mainly for the creative artists. I don't work that much for the producers and the publishers, etc. So that's kind of where what my heart and mind lies. I'm here to talk about the do's and don'ts. By telling you the do's, you also, at least that's my aim, my ambition. You will also get a basic understanding of the don'ts when you're dealing with copyright, music rights. And now, obviously, I'm here to talk about the legalities and not the musicalities or the technicalities concerning the use of music in games. I have a short PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if any of you, wonderful. I prefer to speak, so you don't have to look at the presentation. I'll also email it to Theo, and you're welcome to receive it after today. I travel around quite much talking to various organizations and artists and people in very different fields about the issue of copyright and how to utilize copyright when you use music. And my experience is that you can never be too basic when talking about copyright, because a lot of people think that copyright contracts, when writing copyright contracts or negotiating copyright contracts, whichever side you're on, it's a tough subject to quite understand, but it's not, because it's about knowing actually the essentials of copyright. Who is a copyright holder? What does it mean being a copyright holder? And how do I, as a producer or a publisher or whatever, get those rights, attain those rights that I need to do what I do? So hopefully, what this black PowerPoint will show you in a minute is I'll firstly just basically run through the basic principles. This is like a one-year study at law school, so what you guys will get is like a haiku on copyright. It's obviously copyright in a very condensed format, but I'll be talking about that. And I know Theo told me that a lot of you have been experiencing some struggles or whatever with tonal, and I'm sure also for those of you who don't work in Norway with like similar PROs outside of Norway in terms of how to license copyright on a collective level. So I'll be telling you a bit about that too, because over the last year, Tono has decided to kind of comply with the needs, with like the practical needs of your business, which is a good thing. We have like I think 45 minutes, 40 minutes. Feel free to ask any questions when I'm going along here, and we'll also make sure to have 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. Just a brief notion about copyright. Copyright, opphavsrett in Norway, is in 2023, copyright is basically the same. Copyright legislation is basically the same whichever country you're in. That's due to the fact that we have, you know, how do you say it? The conventions, cross-border legislation that basically makes copyright work in exactly the same way if you're in Norway or Germany or Brazil or the US. So what I'm saying now is based on the Norwegian Copyright Act, but like 95% of what I'm saying also applies to, as I said, also basically any other country that you're in or that you operate in. Who is a copyright holder? When do you become the holder of copyright? And I'm saying this. I didn't start by saying that, but I'm saying this obviously because when you use music in games, someone creates that music, they write it, they record it, and you integrate it into the game, into the final product. And in order to do so in a way that's also legal, that you won't have a phone call from me or any of my colleagues, you need to comply with the things that I'll be going through. So that's why I'm starting out by saying how do you get copyright? Who gets the copyright to a musical work in the first place? And that's always, without exception, that's always the person who actually creates the work, which is a very basic fact, and it might sound simple, but it's the most important thing actually to know in order to write a contract that deals with copyright. Because when you know that it's always, without exception, the person who actually creates the work, or the persons, because quite often, as you know, several persons work together in writing work, writing lyrics, etc. It's always the physical persons who create the work who become the copyright holders. And why is that important to know? It's important to know because when those of you who are producers and the distributors of the final product, in order to do that, you need to have the copyright that you need transferred to you. And that never happens, never ever happens without reaching some sort of agreement with the copyright holders. And that's why you need a contract. This applies to, I'm sure you're all very curious about what these foils say. what I'm saying now applies to all sorts of written and recorded music. So both like tunes, like tunes you can listen to regardless of context, but also sound design. You know, sounds that are made not necessarily as like a melodic pattern, but sound design. Same thing also applies to sound design. And as I said, when you create a musical composition or a lyric, you become the copyright holder. Likewise, when you, as an artist, record a written musical work, when you record it, you play it, you also become the rights holder to your artistic expression, the way to the recording of your playing, your presentation of the music. So again, as producers, you do not only have to deal with copyright, but also the artistic rights that the artists hold to the recordings. And thirdly, which a lot of people aren't aware, not too many years ago, both in Norway but also on an international level, we got a new form of legal protection for the producers of recordings. So now we have copyright, and we have the artist rights, and thirdly we have the producer's rights. And the producer's rights are, by law, awarded to those who initiate and finance the recording, which means that very often you, as producers, or the companies who produce the games, you are also the ones who are, by law, the initial producers, and thereby the owners of the production rights. But what you need to remember is that sometimes that won't be the case. Sometimes if you use, and we actually have two cases that are due for court hearings later this year in Oslo, which deals with the question of who owns the producer's right. We have a production company that owns these rights. Bravo, thank you. Those two cases are both about a company claiming to own 100% of the production rights, but then they have used or hired producers, like musical technical producers, who've contributed as producers. And their claim is that they have a co-ownership of the production rights. And I won't say anything more about that type of rights, but you also need to be aware that the producer's rights are one of three elements in this intellectual property haze that you need to be aware of. Okay? So when I create the musical work, and from now on I'll be talking about copyright solely, not the artist rights or producer's right. But when I create the musical work, I become the copyright holder. And what does that mean? It means that I'm the exclusive owner. I'm the sole owner of the rights to do basically whatever you can do, like on a commercial level, with that work. Exclusive rights. And as I said, if a production company makes games and obviously will want to sell those games with that music incorporated, they need a contract with me as a copyright holder. And the law says something about that too. The law says, and that's the second most important thing that you need to know and need to remember from what I'm saying. The first thing is that copyright always without exception, is born on the hand of the people who actually create the works. The second most important thing is the fact that copyright may be transferred not necessarily as a whole, but also in part. And that's what usually happens on like all areas, book publishing, music publishing, stage rights, etc. Most often, 99% of the cases, you don't need to, the producer doesn't need to have all the rights transferred. So the question is, most often, in most cases, what rights do I need to transfer to the producer in order to give the producer the rights to do whatever they want, or to sell this game. And what this means for you is that when you guys sit down and you're writing a draft contract, or you received a draft, what I say to all my clients is that, of course, I can write the contracts for them, but in most of the cases I send it back to them and I ask them to be creative. Think about, what do I need? What does my employer need, or what do I as an artist think that my employer needs? And then you write that down and put that into the contract. And I'll say a little bit more of that in a second, but contracts, both in Norway and in most other countries, there are no formal requirements when dealing with contracts in this field. If you're selling property, like land, if you sell a house or an apartment, the law says that a contract shall be in writing. Not so in this field. A contract can be oral or in writing, or like a combination. Like a contract, but then you have emails and phone calls and whatever that that adds to the written contract. But of course, what I always recommend, and everyone recommends, is to have a written contract, and only that. Whatever rights you want to transfer and whatever issues you want to agree upon, put that into the contract. And the four corners of the contract, that's like an old way of reading contracts within the Anglo-American legal tradition. So it's not very precise of me to use that term. But what I mean is that the Norwegian copyright law has this own section that says that rights that are not clearly stated in the contracts, they are not transferred. That's a bad translation. But you get the point that if you write a contract as a producer, you need to have those, or a certain amount and certain types of rights transferred to you. If you don't make sure that those rights are clearly stated in the contract, you don't get those rights. And if a contract is ambiguous, it may or may not say that certain rights were transferred. The law says that ambiguity, the risk for that ambiguity lies with the producer and not with the copyright holder. Okay? So when you write contracts, be clear. And it doesn't like be in legalese. It's fully allowed to write Norwegian or English or whatever in plain language. Questions? Everything is clear. That's wonderful. I'll be done in like 10 minutes here. When I studied IT contracts in law school, that was like 96, 97. And from then until now, IT contracts, dealing with like software, but also music rights have like exploded. You know, these contracts used to be like 1 page, easy reads, and now they are like 20 pages, 40 pages, 50 pages with yeah, contracts that no mortal feels able to read, you know. That's why people like me actually have a job. But the basics of a contract, it's you know, everyone can understand it, and it's really not that hard. And even when you get the contract from Sony, a 50-page contract, what you need to look after is the things that I've been through, you know, who is the rights holder and what does the contract say about the rights, you know, which rights goes where. And a bit more specific level, are those rights exclusive? In the sense that, and that's also something that the copyright law says, as a musician I can share rights to my musical works. I can license my rights to musical work. I don't necessarily have to like give them over so that I don't own the rights myself. I can share them with others. That, in legal terms, is a non-exclusive license. Whereas an exclusive license, if you transfer exclusive rights, that means that you hand over the rights to whoever you hand them over to, and you can no longer use those rights yourself. And as I said, if the contract doesn't say anything specific about that, you have not transferred exclusive rights because of that four corners of the contract principle that I mentioned. Obviously, geographic restrictions, also very easy to overlook and not take into considerations. I guess that most games are produced to, you know, in order to be sold across borders. If the contract doesn't say anything, you might, as a producer, end up having attained the rights for Norway, which isn't worth much if your goal is like world, to take over the world. So you also need to specify where in the world do you want to utilize these rights. Time limitations. That's also one of the many ways, you know, to fit, you know, or to define exactly what kind of rights do you want to give. It's not only about, you know, the right to use it in the game or to use it in a audio recording for distribution via Spotify or etc. It's also about time. You can license rights for a certain amount of time, a certain period of time, or you can license rights forever, or you can get those rights without any time limitations. And again, if the contract doesn't say anything about that, that contract will be read, you know, with the how do you say it, with the benefit of the doubt for the copyright holder. That's also a very important issue to address in the contract. Secondary usage. I'll talk more about that when I'm later on, where I'm when I say a few words about PROs and Tono, respectively, in Norway. But secondary use, that's basically all other forms of use that's not, you know, directly connected to the game itself. Because most of you, I guess, when you compose and record music for a company that produces game, you all agree that this music is to be used in that game. But of course, recorded music, or even also written music or lyrics, may of course also be used in other ways. They may be released, as an album. It may be used like in TV series, like The Last of Us. When you use music from a video game into a TV series, that's secondary usage, and you need to be specific in terms of what secondary rights, as it were, does the producer get. And again, if you don't say anything about that, or if the contract is ambiguous in terms of these rights, those rights remain with the copyright holder, with the musician, with you as a musician. I'm saying you, and without actually knowing. Are you guys, all of you, like composers, or you make like sound design, etc., or do you also produce games? Musicians, composers? Great. And producers or whatever? What does that mean? Is. Producer is, yeah. So but you get the point. All of you, or most of you, compose music, I see, and you are the ones who are the best protected by the law. Secondary use, indemnity. That's a word that I think only lawyers use. It's a word that describes that as a copyright holder, when I license my music to a producer, I need to guarantee that I actually have the rights to do so, that I'm like the sole copyright owner, that I don't share my copyright with others, or for that matter, that I haven't stolen some of the music from others. And obviously that's important for you as a producer to make sure that the people that you license music from actually hold the rights that they license to you. So you need an indemnity clause where the musician says so, guarantees that he or she has the rights, and if that proves to not be the case, it's the musician that's responsible for any liability issues. And secondary usage, one form of secondary usage, or at least use of written music, is publishing. And especially over the last like 5, 6, 7 years, we've seen that in the film and TV series industry, that production companies, especially like the big international companies, they claim publishing rights to music that they have commissioned. Before that, at least most often, the composers kept also the publishing rights, which is, I guess most of you know about this PRO system, the system of collective management of rights. As I've been saying, I'll be talking about tonal in a short while. And basically rights within that system is divided into two. You have like the composer's share, and then you have the publisher share. And over the last years, we see more and more examples where the producer wants to own the publishing share of those rights, which sometimes makes sense, but a lot of times does not make sense, because a game producer or a producer of movies or a TV series does not, or isn't into publishing. They don't work as a publisher. They have no internal resources to actually work as a publisher, music publisher for your works. So quite often that doesn't make sense, but be aware of it, and whether you're a producer or a musician or a composer, be aware that publishing rights may also, or should in fact also be an issue that you consider in the contract. Because obviously, especially if if a computer game, becomes popular, again, The Last of Us, as an example, those publishing rights suddenly become very valuable. Another term, another word that only lawyers, or at least mostly lawyers, use is the word remuneration. I used to work with this communications guy in another firm, and he was always asking for remuneration-free coffee wherever he went, which is another word for free. Remuneration, what do you get paid for licensing your music? And as I'm sure a lot of you know, the way that you are paid as a musician or as a composer, it's very often divided into two elements. You get paid for the actual creation of the work, which is like the money that you receive, like a salary. But then you're also paid for the public use of that work. And that corresponds with the way that copyright is constructed. Because when you're a copyright holder, as I said, you have exclusive right, you hold the exclusive right to all kinds of use of a work, both in terms of copying, making physical or digital examples of that work, but also every time that work is performed or presented publicly or made available to the public, that's also an individual part of the copyright. And that's why you get paid both for the actual creation of the work, because you work, you write it, you can get paid for that. But every time, at least in principle, every time that work is made available to the public, that's also, as I said, a way to use a protected work that requires consent from the copyright holder and also some sort of payment, remuneration. And in these contracts that I've been talking about, that's usually where you deal with what you get paid for the actual creation with the work, the actual work that you do as a composer. You deal with that in a contract. That's a portion of the rights that you deal with on a individual level. The right to use work publicly is not only in Norway, but in most countries managed on a collective level. And that's where the PROs enter the scene. I'll be talking about Tono because that's what they're called in Norway, but I'm sure most of you have run into these PROs also in other countries, so they have different names depending on what country you're in. But what they have in common is like the legalities of the way that they work, because they always, Tono and all the other PROs, they license rights after having a license from the musician or from the composer. So the composer enters into a collective management license agreement with Tono, and Tono license those rights on a collective level with like broadcasters and radio stations, etc., 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 live venues. And what happens when a composer enters into a management deal with Tono, and again, all PROs, they make they give the PRO an exclusive license to manage or to license those specific rights, those performance rights. which means that the composer herself or himself isn't in fact allowed to license those rights individually. The minute you've signed with Tono, they are the ones who do that for you, and you cannot do it by yourself. And a lot of composers forget that. I get, like, on a weekly basis, I get at least 2 or 3 contracts from composers, like drafts or signed contracts. Very often I get, like, a phone call from a composer. I just signed this contract yesterday. Can you please read through it just to make sure everything's okay? And in a lot of those contracts, they license to an employer or a producer or whatever also rights that often lies with Tono on an exclusive level, which of course is a problem. And I've understood from Theo and from others that this is something that you've been kind of struggling with for some time. Is that right? I work for a lot of producers, a lot of podcast producers. That's like an exception for me. As I said, I usually only work exclusively for composers and artists, but I've for some reason gone to work as legal counsel for podcast producers, and they have the same problem because for years Tono have applied like live music rates on podcasts. So I had this case just a couple of weeks ago where a producer called me, and they have been talking to Tono, and things got extremely expensive because they paid to the composer. They have several in-house composers, which I guess also a lot of game producers have. They have in-house composers who compose music, both like songs and sound design, etc. This particular composer had made, I think, produced about 30 minutes of music, and this particular episode had been downloaded like 110,000 times. And when you applied Tono live rates on that, the composer was eligible for just south of 50,000 euros in Tono fees, which is great for the composer and at the same time totally like detrimental to producing podcasts. You don't make 500,000 NOK net from even podcasts. I mean, this was one of the most successful podcasts or episodes in Norway this far, and the net worth of that production was like nowhere near 500,000. So as I said, they have the same kind of issues with Tono within the podcast industry, and luckily, and I mean, I love Tono. I love the way that copyright is managed collectively. Since like the 70s, that has generated like literally billions of Norwegian kroner to the creators of music and film content and literature, etc. Which results in the production of new works. So actually the collective management of works is by far the financially most important part of the cultural economy in Norway. So it's a great system, but it's only great if it works for both sides, right? So Tono realized that they had a problem, and that's what usually happens. It takes some time, but to my experience, Tono, after a while, if you just pick up the phone and call them and talk to them, and you describe what you're doing and what the problem is, usually things at some point fall into place. And they have also for podcasts, and I guess some of you know it already, but Tono quite recently made it possible for the composers to carve out from their catalog that they have registered with Tono to carve out use of music in video games on certain conditions. And this is like my it's not a public translation. It's my own translation of the latest version of the contractual text that you will be reading if you contact, or that you will get from Tono if you talk to them about it. So you have like a couple of or three specific conditions that need to be met, or requirements that need to be met in order for you to carve out this specific type of use. And it's I said Tono have tried to solve the problem, but I'm not sure if they're quite there yet, because the first prerequisite is that the work is an original work that's created for that specific game, which means that Sony and others who license existing music to my understanding, at least, that kind of licensing is not something something that you can carve out from the Tono license. So it needs to, firstly, it needs to be an originally written piece of music for that specific game, and it cannot have been made public before it was made available through the game. So that's the first. The second is that the music is incorporated as a part of the game, like sound design or background music or whatever. It may not be music that's like in the forefront of the game, which to me raises the question, okay, so what about like music games? You know, like karaoke-ish games where the music has a more distinguished or present role. That's the second. And the third is, which is not a problem, is that all other forms of use of the music is still to be managed or licensed by Tono or NCB, the Nordic Copyright Bureau. They don't do very much these days. That's, but anyway, all other types of use, then use as an incorporated part of the game, needs to be licensed with Tono. So what you as composers need to do is, at least those of you who have a contract with Tono, is to continue registering the works with Tono, even though they are originally written for a game. All works you register with Tono, and then you send them like a copy of the contract that you have with the producer or whatever, or at least thorough information about the ways that this music is to be used as part of a video game. And then Tono will exempt that type of use from their management. But still, then they have the work registered, so that whenever this tune or whatever is played on the radio or live, if like a band picks it up and play it live, you get Tono royalties. And as I said, this actually kind of concludes what I was thinking about saying. That Tono is no longer a huge problem. I think for most of you, you'll find a way to get around that. What you need to do, though, is to, because when you carve out the use of music in games in your contract with Tono, what remains to kind of settle or agree on with the producer is, okay, how do I get a share of the performance income. Because what you still want to do as a composer is to like be a part of, you know, if this game develops into some huge success, you know, and it sells by the hundreds of thousands or millions, you as a composer wants to be a part of that success. So what you need to do is that when you carve out these rights from Tono and you take them back to yourself, that means that you are back to managing those rights on an individual level in your contract with the producer. And I do that a lot also for composers who write original music for operas and musical theaters, etc., where Tono does not manage rights in that particular field, and I help them. Obviously, NOPA helps their members with making individual agreements with employers or producers or whatever that makes them eligible for some kind of share of a success. Like a royalty or whatever. But what remains, and which I'm not quite sure actually as to how Tono will how they will address that. But like library music, you know, pre-written and produced music, and basically all forms of pre-existing music. That's not, at least as of now, something that you can carve out. So my advice is simply to call Tono, talk to them, describe the product, describe the economy. That's super helpful. That's something that Tono will always have to know something about. If you want to make some sort of like special deal with them, which you may be able to, you need to explain the economy for them. So call them. There's a guy in Tono called Herman Foss. I'm sure he would not be super happy that I'm asking all of you to call him, but he's like the guy to talk to, and he's understanding, and he's been doing this for like forever. So call Herman and talk to him if you're a composer, but also definitely if you are a producer. Lastly, just very briefly, I mentioned artists' rights, because a lot of you, I guess, you compose music, but you also record it, and that makes you, in copyright terms, that makes you an artist with artist rights, which are basically identical to copyrights. As a composer, you have Tono. They manage copyrights on a collective level. The Tono, or the PRO for artists, are in Norway called GRAMO, G-R-A-M-O. And I actually just spoke to them this morning just to have them confirm, which they did, that GRAMO do not manage either synchronization or public performance rights on behalf of artists in video games. So the reason why I'm telling you this is that as a producer, at least as of now, you won't get like an invoice from GRAMO for public use of the recordings. But as an artist, you need to be aware that you have artist rights, and especially if you're signed to a label, a record label, maybe you need to discuss with them, you know, how to manage those rights, because in principle, by law, you have those rights, and as I started by saying, if the producer wants your rights, want to use your rights, they need to have them transferred in the contract, and that also applies to artist rights. Everything still clear? Well, I don't believe you because every time I ask this question, some guy calls me like 2 days after, and I have this question. So if one of you have a question, be sure that, like, at least, yeah. Oh. I'll get one of those for my kids. So they cannot talk without having like the red mic. Please.
All right. Two questions, actually, if I may. First is when you're with a PRO, say Tono, BMI, IceCap, whatever. A question that I have been asked that I've not been able to reply is, yeah, the PRO collects the money, but where is the money coming from? Like, game producers, companies are saying like, so that means that BMI is going to call me, so I can have to pay to them, so they can, where is that financing coming from, depending on how the music is distributed? And second is, since game development is like a worldwide industry, many times we work with developers in other countries. Which laws should, I mean, if I'm working with a studio in Sweden, should I get a lawyer in Sweden or in Brazil or in the United States? What laws would apply to that kind of contract?
Yeah, well, that's two great questions. The first one, I think that question is actually a big part of the reason why both Tono and also Gramo still haven't really entered into the market and started collecting royalties, because they are not sure, who to contact or who to claim this money from, which is easy, in the live music market. Obviously you go to the to the venue or to the arranger, and that's how you pay Tono. But in your like ecosystem, that's not clear. That's as I mentioned, within the podcast industry, at least up until now, Tono have directed claims directly to the producers. But I guess that's under the assumption that the producers are also the ones who are making the works available to the public, which isn't the case. Quite often you have like external producers who produce content for like Schibsted or whoever, and in all those cases where it's not the producer that makes the work available, but some other party, Tono should collect their royalties from that party. So that's also again, in the live music market or industry, how that works usually, or at least that's the principle, is that when I play a live show at some venue, the live show sends in, like my set list with the works, and basically that's the same that should be done here. That whoever distributes the game. I'm saying that without actually having knowledge about how that works, but in principle, it's the distributor, the party that actually makes the work available. That's the copyright principle. So that's also something that you need to explain to Tono, make them aware of who is the actual, who are the ones who are making it available. The next question is, that's some of the beauty about the PROs, because as I said, they all have like these internal agreements between them. is the word I'm searching for. But this is like a cobweb of collective management systems that are interconnected all across the world. So basically, in principle, it shouldn't matter actually which country you're in, because if you have like a distributor who does what they are supposed to do, you know, in terms of reporting to Tono, they report to that national PRO, and then they will go into their system, and they will see that, okay, we have this particular individual who lives in Norway or wherever, Stockholm, and then they send those money to Tono or to STIM, and they pay it. You know, they distribute it further. So that's like the ground rule. Whichever country you're in, as a composer, it doesn't really matter, because as long as you have a contract with Tono or STIM or GEMA or someone in some country, that's enough for you. That's what you should be concerned with. Then it's up to the distributor to actually report their use.
Right. Thanks.
Great. Yep. Please, all the way up.
Thank you. This side up, yeah. Some years back, I did I helped out a video game production company who was bewildered by the tonal attitude to modular media as opposed to linear media. A live concert is a linear media, a film, the music for a film is linear media, but they were simply unable to understand the nature of a modular media. They said, well, how long is a piece of music? And I said, it depends. What do you mean it depends? It depends on the player. Okay, but how long is the piece of music? And so we went circular around that, and I simply gave up. And I think that's one of the main reasons why there's this practice of buyout, where the video game producer wants to acquire all rights, because it's the PRSOs have been unable to set up a strategy for how to make dividend on it in a realistic and practical matter. Do you have any experience with such a problem?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's I mentioned podcasts also, because I mean which is kind of a modular medium, you know, and it depends on the listener how much music you end up listening to, and video games even more so. But I think it's important to kind of realize also that the PROs they as I said, they need to be explained. You know, every time you have like a new way of utilizing music, new technology, new ways of communicating music, they simply need to be made aware of, you know, how this works, and I mean I have the same experience. Sometimes it can be really frustrating to, you know, to get there. My advice is actually, and I'm looking at my colleague from NOPA here, and you might not approve, but in my experience and what I tell a lot of composers is actually call NOPA, or call like the Composers Union, because they aren't formally co-owners of NOPA, but of the PROs, but their members are, you know, and they are at least usually. The Composers Union have representations in the boards of the PROs. So if you get stuck, and if you guys as a business get stuck, it might help actually also not only to, you know, talking to Tono and trying to make them understand, but also talk to the Composers Union and ask them to kind of help out. Which is not like a very concrete or specific piece of advice, but that's what eventually, in my experience, actually leads to something, because then people as Trine and others may actually yeah, be able to, you know, they can share the experience, and as I said, these collective management systems are fantastic both for the rights holders but also for the users, because they are like one-stop shops. You can go to them and license rights on an international level, and we want to keep it that way. But in order to keep it that way, they need to understand the new technologies and the new businesses. So again, I'm not being very concrete, but yes, that's my experience sometimes. But as I said, podcast, I work with that now, and my guess is that within like a month or two, we will actually have a separate regime for licensing music to podcasts, and that's actually partly because we've kind of included also the composers' unions into that dialogue. So call them, or of course you're free to call me too. Please, in the middle.
Avanti.
Ooh.
Yeah. If a game producer wants to use music from Norway that is already published today, what should they do now? What can they do?
Quite often that music is, lies with a publisher, a music publisher. If we're talking about the written music, if it's recorded music, it lies with a record label. But what you need to do is simply to contact the publisher and ask them, because as I said, I think at least in the future, you just need to tell me when to stop. But I can finish it. Okay, yeah. I think like most times in the future, these types of use will be carved out of the Tono management. So you contact the publisher, or you, or at least you ask the composer. If a composer doesn't have a publishing agreement, he or she.
Will there be any kind of trouble if that composer is a member of Tono?
It no longer will be, because as I said, slowly this kind of finds its form, in this field. So I don't think it'll be a problem, but right now it is.
Formally, yes.
and that's the reason for your question. So, but I would advise you to contact the publisher and ask, what kind of price do they feel, is fair, and also the composer. And that's actually also what we do, within this or with these podcast issues. In order to find some sort of reasonable remuneration, the ones to ask are the rights holders themselves. So you talk to the composer, talk to their publisher, and then you take that information back to Tono and say, okay, this is like the level, this is where it should be, and then you make like a special arrangement with them. It's a hassle. it's not as easy as it should be, but it's a start at least.
Yeah. One more, or are we done? Are we done now? Okay.
Yeah, sure. I work in music publishing, and we have quite a lot of experience of licensing songs to major video games. And just as a information, like the music-heavy games such as Rockstar and Ubisoft, like the dance games, etc., they usually pay mechanicals. And mechanicals is like they take all the music that's in the production, and they kind of give it a percentage value, and you get a small percentage of the income for each unit sold. So it happens, and when it comes to like the buyouts, I guess there are two issues with that. One is if a game becomes really popular, then the mechanicals or performance rights is worth a lot of money, so the producers would like to keep them themselves. But also it could be a problem because it's complicated, like we've been talking about. So there's like two things of this, and it is possible for Tono to waive the rights for public performance or mechanicals in every case if it's worth it. You just need to talk to Tono. But I guess my question is, what in the economical sense, like if you're invited to write score for a game that has every possibility to become really popular, and you're asked to transfer all your copyright to the game producer as give away your rights. What's your recommendation? If you're like, on one side you risk losing the job because there's hundreds of other composers willing to do it, or should you stay firm and demand a writer share?
How many hours do we have?
Like,
yeah.
Because I guess you would kind of get compensated in the fee.
Yeah, because I mean that's a prerequisite. If you give away your rights, you need to be compensated, or in some way or another you want to be a part of the success. And again the kind of vague answer to that is that in those cases, and I do that quite a lot also for composers who write music for films and TV series, and it's like a case-by-case issue. You need to know the economy, as I said, also with Tono, you need to kind of realize what the economy is with the production. That's kind of a mistake that some lawyers do when you work on the rights holder sides. You don't really care, or you don't really get a thorough understanding about the actual economics, in the production, and you need to know about that. What's like the net worth, or the assumed net worth of the production, etc. So what I usually try to go for is some sort of royalty, some sort of percentage-based fee, but what you calculate, the basis that you use for calculating that might vary. Sometimes it's like the total net fee, sometimes it's like per copy. So it varies, but I think what's important to realize for composers and also publishers, of course, I mean, whoever you are managing rights on behalf of someone, you need to understand that it's exactly that. It's like a concrete case-by-case issue. So that's again, it's vague, and we don't have a lot of time. So, but there is no like standard solution. That's what a lot of people think. And of course, a lot of composers come to me and they say, I risk losing my job if I don't give in to this offer. Usually, that's not the case actually, except from, of course, if you produce like library music, stock library music. That's the way that works. You make like generic music. That's a terrible term, but apart from that, usually, in my experience, it helps if you try to establish some sort of dialogue, and you might get lucky and you might score big time, but maybe you just get some. Like I have composers who work for or who write for theaters. Sometimes they get like 5, 6, 7% of the ticket resale. Sometimes they get like 1% or 2%, but at least they get something. Again, it's vague, but feel free to, as I said, feel free to contact Tono and also me, and remember that's the most important part of my answer. It's a case-by-case thing.
Yeah, just to note, and most of you probably know this already, but we in GAIN, we've been the ones that have been in talk with Tono to try to figure this out, because there's a lot of that they don't understand of how games work. And over the last 3 years, me, Sarah, and Frederick, we've been pretty deep into that with them, was part of the new change that they made. It was part of what the conversation that we led to. Harman Foss is definitely the one that's been in talks with us. And then, of course, we want to work with NOPA and others that want to make this easier and make it work, because a lot of them don't understand how the game business work, and we understand both sides, so it would make it easier if we could just help them understand that side. I think that's really what it's just a lack of understanding of what happens on our side of the aisle.
Exactly. It's not bad will. I mean, people want to make money and they want their music to be heard, and just one last thing I forgot to mention, because these days we have Music Nest. That's kind of this new entity, this new enterprise on the label side. That's kind of developed in order to try to solve some of the management issues that aren't resolved by Gramo and the other PROs. So that might also be a place to go in terms of artist rights and master rights. You can contact Music Nest. I don't remember what they're called in like Denmark or Sweden, but they also have like similar organizations there. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And of course, if you want to ask more questions to him, I'm sure he's... Are you sticking around today?
I'll stick around like half an hour.
Awesome.
At least.
Sarah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Hans Marius. That was really great. We could have been talking about this for many hours. Yeah, it's time for a short break now. I would also like to mention just one thing. Johan, who asked the last question, if you wonder anything about music publishers and experience, yeah, you can also ask Johan about his experience with licensing music for games on the music publishing side, like concrete examples. Yeah, okay, let's have a 5-minute break, run and get some coffee and everything, and we'll be back here soon. Thank you. Welcome back from this short break. We're ready for today's first panel. The name of the panel is Adapting to Change, Sound Design in an Era of New Technologies. And as you can see, we have Dave and Daniel here. And this panel will be moderated by Theo Nogueira, who is Game Chair and Audio Director in Snowcastle Games. So take it away.
Nice. Yeah. So reason why I'm actually here is because I guess nobody else in the board wanted to take an Unreal talk. And I'm the one working on it regularly. So, but of course, I'm more than happy to be with the two of you, and specifically Dave and Richard. You guys are heroes of mine. I said that before. And I think that Unreal has a very strong path forward, and we should all be aware of it. So, well, I will just dive in. You both microphones good to go?
I think so.
Cool, nice.
Test. Yeah.
So, welcome. And Dave, both you and Richard have been focusing in Unreal for years. Like, you started when nobody was using Unreal, and using Unreal as a way to teach people game audio in general and systems and how do you build things. How did that started, and why did you choose Unreal as the first tool?
So we started teaching at Leeds Beckett at roughly about the same kind of time. Richard was there a year before me when I started, and he came from industry and wanted to do, and I think it was called interactive audio at the time, was the module that we started teaching, game sound effectively. And we were looking for what tools and software can you use to teach people this stuff. And this was Unreal 3, so it's called UDK at the time. And the big thing that sold using a game engine as opposed to Fmod or Wise as middleware was that you can pretty quickly take a sound from your Windows Explorer or Finder, whatever, drop it into the world, set up some attenuations, press a button, and then you're in the game walking around and you can hear that sound fade in and fade out, and it's much more immediate. We felt it was much more immediate than doing that in Wise and kind of imagining what that would sound like actually in a world. And so it was the ability to get a sound into a virtual world and play it and hear how it responds to you moving around. And then you can build little systems that do things, and if I do this, the sound does that, and if I do that, the sound does this, and all those kinds of things. And that was the reason primarily. And then so we wrote the book, 2010, and we wrote another book, 2015, I want to say. It's just been lifelong buds ever since.
Yeah, I can tell. You guys are almost like the same person in the same room. And Dan, you also have been really deep into Unreal now. And how did you move into Unreal? How was that transition?
Yeah, so my journey into Unreal is actually much more much newer than David's. Because my first Unreal project was actually the game that I showcased here, that I started maybe 1.5 years ago. That was my first way into Unreal, and then we used Fmod at that point, and then it was just diving into it. But I quickly found my way into using blueprints and using nodes. So coming from Unity at that time, where I could do some coding, then I could just do much more quickly inside of Unreal. And same goes with metasounds. Like, I only started using metasounds maybe 6-7 months ago, and when I started there, then I did not know how to do anything. Basically, I did not know how to play a sound. I did not know how to connect it to the mixer. I did not know anything. But then slowly, when I got the mindset of working in that environment, then I can work much more freely now than I could before. So there's a bit of a steep learning curve, at least for me, but once you get over that, then it's definitely much more powerful.
Yeah, on my end, I actually have, I was working with Fmod and Wise for a long time, mostly in Unity, but then I started getting Unreal jobs, and they were all like, yeah, we're still working with Fmod and Wise, and I still kept doing this, and at the same time, that's when I encountered your book of game audio implementation and the courses and the videos, and I was like, wait, okay, I'm going to try to apply this I'm learning from here into the middleware that I'm using, because I want to use this, and then try to use that instead. And it became so much harder, and I was actually doing double work there until I realized that I can just use Unreal. And that was in Unreal 4, so there was no meta sounds, there was nothing like that. It was before what was then Time Synth and then became Quartz. And all of that was a little complicated also to see how am I going to build systems that I could easily and fast build in Fmod and Wise into Unreal. So I kind of was thrown in the water because pretty much the requirement that Snowcastle gave me was, if you want to work with us, you need to work only in Unreal. And no middleware, we're not doing that. It's too much work for the past projects and we don't want to deal with that anymore. And I was, okay, sure, I'll figure it out. And it was a journey, I think, for sure. But then now when Unreal 5 came out and all the new tools like MetaSounds and Soundscape and all the crazy things that are making sounds, adaptive sound and adaptive audio implementation so much quicker and easier, what do you feel like is what's going to happen from now on? What was the threat of Unreal towards middleware, and how is that going to change the whole structure of that for all of us that are here now?
Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe I can go first, because I can definitely sense like there's a movement going on. Like there's more and more games that steer towards only using Unreal Audio, like that we don't need middleware in the same way as we did earlier. So I definitely predict like there will be many more games in the near future that only will use Unreal Audio, and especially once that the whole infrastructure is up and running with Unreal Audio and with MetaSound, that we can have a library with patches and some user guides, and we have some great tutorials. Then it will definitely become easier and easier. Because once I started with MetaSounds, then it was brand new. Then nobody knew what they were doing basically. Then there were some few guides online, but then it didn't quite fit to my needs. But now there's much more content out there, so it's easier to get started with the specific project you have.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think as more people start playing around with what Unreal can do, then more games will start using native audio, because it is capable of doing much more than it used to be able to do, for sure. But I think there's always going to be a place for middleware, depending on kind of team sizes. The beauty of Fmod, particularly, so I much prefer Fmod over Wise, because I open up Wise and just go, nope. every single time I have to Google, how would you make it make a noise? How would you make it do this? Because it's just this big grey thing. Whereas Fmod, as I'm sure you're aware, makes much more sense to my brain. And it's much quicker to learn in terms of getting sounds in and making them do things than Unreal might be. So if you want to learn something, Fmod, Wise, Unreal, any tool is a great tool to learn. But depending on kind of team sizes, it might just be that you're in this country over there working on the sound, and the developers and coders in this country over here, and they can just provide you with the hooks. And so middleware works really well for that in terms of like a separate, isolated workflow. But I think that, having said all of that, I think understanding how games work and being able to go, well, I've got this really good idea that maybe if the player gets shot 5 times in a row within a certain time frame, we should do something to the sound to indicate that that's a really bad thing for the player to have experienced. But if you're working in middleware, you've got to ask someone to build a system that does that. Whereas if you're working natively, you can knock up a real quick blueprint prototype without having to touch code or anything like that, visual objects, etc. And you can show people, look, here's this cool idea I've just had. It's really good, should we do that? And they go, yes. And then they can pass that over to code and make it work properly. So yes. Middleware will still be popular, but I think that Unreal will become, the native audio in Unreal will become more popular still, I think, than it is at the moment.
Go ahead.
So just to add on this point with the whole collaboration thing, because I can definitely agree there. Like on this current project that I'm working on, then there's 2 other composers working on it, and it was super easy for them to work with Fmod, because then they could pretty much just have their own events. They only needed to open Fmod. But in order to open this current project, then they need to download 200 gigabytes for the whole Unreal game to get up and running. So there's a bit of a hurdle there. Like you you need a powerful PC. First of all, it's difficult on Mac. It's doable, but it's just much easier on a PC. So that locks some people out. Then you need a lot of storage. You need a great graphics card and all that. And that's only to get inside of Metasounds and to get the things running. So there's a bit of a barrier there where it's just easier for a composer or a sound designer only to focus about your middleware.
Yeah, for sure. I can see that point, and I think in a way I've always told all students I also have that I think you should learn all the tools. It's important to, because at some point you never know what jobs you're getting, and what studios are going to be using, and the more you know, the better for you. Now on the next thing I was thinking is talking about adapt as the theme for the conference, and we are on constant adaptability because our industry changes very, very fast. And right now, the big trend is AI and machine learning, which has been in the industry for years. It's just been used very on the background where people don't really see. What do you think? Do you think that's the new trend? Do we think that's going to make a big impact on what we do, or do you think there's something else getting on that boat?
I'll be honest, I'm not particularly up to speed with what AI can and can't do. Doesn't really interest me, I'll be honest. I've used ChatGPT a couple of times to knock up some codes in Python for something I needed to do real quick and save me having to learn Python. I just told ChatGPT what I wanted it to do, and here's how you do it, and it didn't work. I then had to go and learn Python enough to fix the AI's mistakes, which is fine. I know that some games have used AI-generated dialogue as like placeholders, so they can prototype and iterate systems a lot quicker and then pay proper voice actors and talent and get the recordings done properly. So in that respect, I think that's a good use of AI. It's ethical. They're not, they're still paying people to do their jobs. They're not trying to steal people's jobs. Damn the machines. But I think there's always going to be a place for people. So you could say to an AI machine, make me this. Richard and I were talking about this over a beer last night, or several. Make me the sound of a creaky door, and an AI can do that. It can go like that. But if you want the door to be sad, or you want that creaky door to be a happy creaky door, or an angry creaky door, I don't know. Feel free to contradict me, but I don't know if AI is there yet, or if it could ever get there, because that requires an understanding of what happy is as a mood and an emotion, but also what that means in terms of how a sound can be happy or sad or angry and things. And I'm sure some very clever people who are much cleverer than I are building algorithms that can do all this, but I haven't heard it yet. But then, as I said at the start, I'm not out there actively looking for it either. So, yeah.
What do you think, Dan?
Well, I would like to take the opposite position here, because I actually do think that AI will be capable of creating sounds of a sad door and a happy door, and have seen some tools that kind of mimic that technology. Like there was a talk last year on GACO about this technology. Now I forgot who it was, but
It was Oliver. I don't know where he is right now.
oh yeah,
but
right,
he's
yeah,
somewhere.
that was Oliver. Yeah, that was great. And I can also see it combined with this large language modeling that ChatGPT is, where you take large data information and then use that to make something new and unique, like a happy creaking door or something like that. I can definitely see that AI will be more involved in sound generation process, because you can easily imagine that you can some years in the future have a machine learning or AI inside of Unreal that's hooked up to Metasounds, the synthesizer in there, so it will maybe procedurally generate some sounds based on some text prompts or based on something that's going on in the game. That's not where we are now, but that could be super cool. Another use. Oh,
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
okay. Another use case that I definitely could see, like the whole mixing technique that you talked about in your talk, we have the 7 bands and you have the dynamic EQ and all that. That's definitely something that I could see AI be doing. That you could maybe take recordings from a biosphere somewhere, like in a natural environment, and it could listen to how the animals interact to each other and take some data from that you could then learn on with how to do it automatically. Maybe that would be pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think the sound generation thing, that's something actually Oliver has been working with, and it's very interesting also on creating new versions. So many times we just create randomization of sounds of footsteps, for example, on pitches and volume. That's kind of usually where we go. But getting AI to generate sounds that are similar but not exactly the same can also create a variation that you don't actually have to record 4 different footsteps, 10 different footsteps. You get 1 and it will generate for you 3 more. And things like that, I think it could be quite helpful in terms of being a tool and not something that's taking anybody's job.
Yeah. We kind of have tools a bit like that in Reaper already. There's scripts, you can go press a script button and you get 10 variations of a sound, different strip silences out of sounds and things. I think, yes, I'm all in favour of AI being tools to solve the repetitious, boring tasks. But I don't want AI to design my happy doors. I want to do it myself, thank you.
Speaking of boring tasks, then there's one specific thing that I really could see AI be doing, like writing documentation for your code. I have tried to use some AI tools to write documentation for my blueprints, but it's just a bit difficult because blueprints are not that easy to read. So that you have these huge pages of text with the same script in C# in Unity, that would be much shorter and much precise. So that's easier to create documentation for. But I would love to see a tool that could take an image of my meta sound or take an image of my blueprint and then write proper documentation for what's going on in that blueprint, so I don't have to do it.
Yes.
That sounds like very nice. Even more if you have to explain it to a programmer that does not do anything audio.
Exactly.
That's a great idea. And then just on that the sense of all of that, we also have the fact that there's a lot of creatives, specifically composers, that have no knowledge of the technical side of things, and sometimes they don't want to have that knowledge and understand. But it's becoming more and more common that that's a job requirement, that you're expected to at least understand the basics. So when you create your music, you know exactly where it's going to start, where it's going to end, how it's going to be set up on a system that maybe someone else is going to set up for you. But you at least need to create the music in a way that can be easily chopped and put together into the system, but that you need to understand how it works. And it seems like more and more these jobs are requiring this. Not only you need to know Fmod and Wise and be able to implement into them, but now a lot of jobs are asking, it's a bonus that you understand Unreal or you understand Unity. It's a bonus that you can write and read in C#, C++. But those bonuses usually become requirements later on. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's going to become a thing that creatives are going to be required to be more technical?
Well, first off, then I just want to say that that I, for most part, have the biggest respect for people who actively say, I don't want to learn any technical tools. I only want to focus on my music, because then they also tend to not branch out in their knowledge. They can be very specific with only composing great music. But also, it gets easier to get a job in the industry if you know middleware, and some places that's definitely a requirement, and that could also be well with Unity and Unreal, but also depends on how what your reputation is. Like if you have a lot of composer gigs, then maybe you don't need to learn C# coding. Then maybe you can find somebody else to do it and only focus on that. But of course, to diversify yourself, then it's absolutely great to dive into the engines.
I think.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I agree. Absolutely. I think there's nothing wrong with being so focused on your craft, whether that's composing. I think there's a lot more leeway for composers to not understand implementation than there is for sound designers, I think. Particularly the bigger name, the Hans Zimmery type people and stuff, they can just go, here's some music, we'll sort it out. But speaking as someone who loves a strong word, but I love implementing, it's the thing that I find the most interesting. I don't understand how you, and no offense if this doesn't apply to anybody, but I don't understand how you could want to work in video games and not want to understand how your sounds or music are going to be implemented. Not necessarily how to implement them yourself, but how they're going to be implemented. Because for me, that would make the sounds or the music better. It would make for a much stronger player experience if that music has been composed with the system in mind, rather than just, well, I'll create for you wanted 4 happy stems, 4 action stems, 4 sneaky stems, right, here's those stems. But if you know what the system is going to be doing to those stems at any given point in time, then to me that means you would create better stems, music, a better experience for the player, and understanding how that works. You don't have to understand C++ or C# or anything like that. You don't even have to understand blueprints or even how F mod or Ys are working. But if you, at the very least, understand what they're going to be doing to your music and to your sounds at runtime in the game, then for me that's going to produce a stronger experience for the player. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
So it's really more about game logic, right? Understanding the logic behind things, not really the actual implementation process. And I 100% agree with that. And I can relate because I love the implementing side, and I feel like sometimes I take a little bit too much of everything. And Chris is my witness. I kind of I love to do all of it. I do sound design and music, and I want to implement it, and it's fun. And I think in general, it's a part of how I also make the creative decisions. Right, like I start thinking about the systems. I start thinking how it's going to play out and the logic behind it before I even start making the music or designing the sounds, because I want to make sure it will work in that sense. And I know I'm the exception to the rule, but I think still I understand what you mean.
Because if you to go back to the point from I made earlier, but if you've got this idea of, I think this would make this game, this moment in this game would feel so much better if this happened. If you don't know how that can be happened, that's poor English, apologies, then you can't explain to anyone else how that can be happened. I've done it again, sorry. But did you get what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
For me also, I can also, well, for me, music design and how you design the adaptive music system, that can be as big part of the composition as the sound generation itself. And I've seen that when I have worked with the Danish composer Martin Stiandersen. Often, like he worked on Control and Back 4 Blood, where he worked on a really granular level of music design, where he basically has thousands of really small assets in the game. Like in themselves, they are not music per se, but the systems that he built for those small assets to interact with each other and to respond to the game logic and other ways around. That's his way of composing music, which I find really fascinating way of approaching it.
And all of the games that Martin works on get huge accolades for how the music is so strongly tied to the player experience and stuff. So let's say Hans Zimmer writes your music. He's going to get good reviews for his music being really nice, and the soundtrack sounds really good when you put the CD player, that's how old I am, when you put the CD in your CD player and press play, the music sounds really nice. Yeah. But does that make for a strong experience? I don't know, but when Martin does it, it's a super strong experience in it, and it's tied perfectly to the game, isn't it? Because he understands systems.
Exactly. And one of his great advantages is that he works in this gray area of what sound design and what composition. So it's ambiguity that just feels so natural when you're playing the game. So it doesn't feel like that there's a soundtrack going on. It doesn't feel like, oh, here we have some battle music and here we have some stealth music. It's a much more smooth experience when you listen to the music in the games.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all that. I think it's and even more with bigger composers. I think that's definitely something. Bear McQuarrie as well with God of War. I know he doesn't have that side of technical, but he enjoys being a part of that with the actual or the director. And I feel like that also makes a difference when they are involved on implementation, even though they're not actually doing the work.
They're having the conversation about how it's going to work.
Exactly. I think that makes a huge difference because they can explain exactly how they want things to play out. And again, that goes back to the game logic, right? So what would you say for the people that are starting out now? What do you think what should they start with? What is the people that are starting in game audio specifically and want to learn implementation? Where do you think they should start?
I think that Dave had a really good point that you don't really need to learn blueprints. You don't really need to learn FMOD, but as long as you understand the systems lies behind it, like the interactivity, the adaptivity in game audio, then it doesn't matter which software that you're using, basically. So if you understand those basic structures, then you can become really far. But as I see it, then it's just picking one software and then just trying out a lot of different things. Because if you go from FMOD to WISE, then it's the same systems. It's structured in a completely different way, but the overall logic to it on how audio behaves in a game is the same.
Exactly that. Download them all, open them all up, do the most basic thing in all of them, and see which one you prefer, and then learn that one because that's the one that makes the most sense to your brain. And then once you've learned that one, you can then transfer skills, understanding, knowledge from one to the other. FMOD and WISE, they look very different. Unreal looks very different. Unity still exists. or Godot, or Godot, however we're pronouncing it. They exist, all these tools. They work in different ways, but they all do the same thing. They all play a sound, and they all randomize a sound's volume, and they all randomize a sound's pitch, and they all stop a sound, and they fade a sound, and they can put effects on sounds. The menus are just in different places. It's like Pro Tools, Logic, and Cubase, and Nuendo, and Reaper. They all do the same things, just in a different way. So find the one that makes the most sense to the way that you like to work, learn that one well, and then transfer the skills across, is what I would say.
And they're all free to download. You can just download them all on your computer right now and just play with them as much as you want. That makes a lot of sense. Let me see. We have a little bit of room. Does anybody have any questions?
We're that good, Daniel. We're that good.
Yeah,
Nobody's got any questions.
Yeah, we're fast. No questions.
While we're waiting for questions, then I can maybe also just add that that I see that don't be afraid of experimenting. Download WISE, download FMOD, download whatever, and just go nuts with it. Like I've really enjoyed taking WISE and doing some experiments with that. Like I have recreated our Parts music system that's like serialism, and try to build some self-driving mechanism inside of WISE. Also, Steve Reich's clapping music that also made in WISE, which was a really fun exercise. Also made a game that only runs inside of WISE. So there's no game engine, but you can use WISE as a game. So yeah.
And the fun fact that you actually built the game in Reaper.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's that. If nobody knows that, he has done that. So yeah, well, if nobody has any questions, I have one more. What do you think are the challenges that we are coming to in our side of the aisle, in game audio specifically? what do you think is coming towards us, considering the industry is changing? Should we prepare to adapt ourselves to?
This was one of your questions that I did not prepare for.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
I think one of the things that will happen is as with every generation of console and PCs have come out, the games look better. There's more physics involved in the games. There's more. There becomes more demand and expectation from the player for it to be, a truly compelling, immersive experience. And if there's one tiny little bug, then you get shot to pieces and on the social media and stuff. So I think as games get even more photorealistic, potentially with certain genres of games, we're going to get up close to this uncanny valley thing. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So the more close we get to something being realistic, the more obvious the fact that it's not realistic becomes. And so as games move towards that, and not all games are going to do this, there's always going to be the games that are stylized and cartoony and stuff, but some games will try and go for this. Like the new Death Stranding trailer, I had to look a second time to check that it wasn't a film. As these games, the sound needs to be real in these sounds because the visuals are real. But what does real mean in a game? Because you can't have realistic natural fall-offs with sound because the mixing becomes an absolute nightmare.
100%.
So, yeah.
There's also no excuse anymore for not delivering excellent audio to a game. Like, if you go back 20 years or something like that, then it was the bigger studios who had access to wires and like discrete tools. But now it's democratized, so everyone has access to the same kind of software. So it's really easy to go into these tools and work on some excellent sounding audio. So I think that the requirements, as you also said, that we have as a listener to a game, it just increases, and even for small indie games, not only AAA high fidelity titles, because if you have some stylized game, then you maybe have some other focus point when you're listening to that. It's maybe not this high fidelity, but you still want to be immersed in the game, and that's something that you can do one person now as a sound designer, a composer. You don't need a whole team to do that. You just need time, basically.
Yeah, I can see that easily too. Yeah. Any final questions? Yes, there's one there. Where's the cube? No, we want the live stream people to hear it too.
Yeah. Oh.
Can use of middleware make it less risky for cases where, for instance, a game engine changes its terms in the future? For instance, Fmod is quite independent of game engines, so Meta Sounds is not so independent of Unreal. What are your comments to that?
No, I think that's a fair point. Absolutely. Yeah, having a platform agnostic tool where you do your sounds, middleware, would separate you from any potential issues. So as a sound designer, if the game developers suddenly wanted to pivot and switch from to Unreal at a given point in time, your Fmod systems still stand up and still hold. They just have to provide you with some different hooks instead. So as an insurance policy, yeah.
I kind of had those thoughts myself a couple of years ago because I used a tool called Ink for writing the story.
Yeah.
And it is originally made for Unity, but it also works independently. So I'm quite lucky in that case.
Yes, right.
So.
Any other questions? I don't think so. Chris, do you want to catch that? Oh. All right. So, yeah, thank you very much. This was very great. And, yeah, if anybody has any other questions, also feel free to ask them on our Discord later on or just find any of us out and mingling. And, yeah, thank you.
Tusind tak.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you for a great panel. Yeah, we'll have a 15-minute break now. I just have to say one thing, that short sentence about comparing Pro Tools and Logic and Cubase. It's strange how a small sentence can make something seem so much less scary. Thank you. Yeah, and great answer to what we were prepared to adapt to as well. Yeah, thank you very much. And be back at in 15 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Testing, testing.
Okay, I think we're back. In my daily job, I listen to quite a lot of music every day, but there's one thing that keeps playing that is stuck on my brain that I listen to every day, and that's the soundtrack of Minecraft. I do have a 6-year-old son who started to play the game 2 months ago, and every morning when he wakes up, I say, "Good morning, Alfred," and he answers, "Minecraft." That's actually true. I already have a teenager in the house. Yeah, you of course know who I'm talking about, and that's Lena Rain. She's an award-winning composer and producer based in Vancouver, BC. She has written original soundtracks for highly acclaimed video games such as Celeste, Minecraft, Chicory, A Colorful Tale, and many others. She has also released electronic music under the name Kurain, and is currently working with the creators of Celeste, Extremely OK Games, on their upcoming game Earthblade, as well as the next game from Chicory developers Wishes Unlimited, Beastie Ball. And the fun fact is that thanks to the success of Pigstep in Minecraft, Lena managed to get a small job writing a theme song for a competitive cooking show, Secret Chef of Hulu, because the producer's kid kept playing Kidstep on loop and he had to look up to who wrote it. It's all about the kids, guys. Also, thanks to the success with Celeste and Minecraft, she was invited to share a dinner in Tokyo with a member of her own game music idols. In today's talk, Lena will let us know more about how her history with game music informs the way she writes music. I think it's 6 a.m. where she is right now. So please welcome Lena Rain via live stream for her talk, Reverence in Game Music, celebrating the history of the medium through composition.
Hello. It's so great to be here virtually. I cannot hear the audience, so I assume that I saw visual applause, so I'm going to assume that there was applause. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm just going to jump right into the presentation. Yeah, like she mentioned, this is a talk called Reverence in Game Music, celebrating the history of the medium through composition. The lovely intro already covered generally who I am. I'm a composer. I've worked on the games that she mentioned, and more recently also Harmony, The Fall of Reverie, which is a game by Don't Nod, creators of Life is Strange. It was a really wonderful collaboration that I got to work with them, that released earlier this year. I went to college for a 4-year composition degree. That's sort of my background in music. And my career getting into games started as a certification tester at Nintendo of America, because I grew up in Seattle. They were based in Redmond, so I was able to get a contract position there, which is a very lucky thing to kind of get into games and to get used to the environment of making games and how they get released on consoles, and then eventually went to Warner Brothers Games, and then worked at a company called ArenaNet, which makes the game series Guild Wars. And that led to me becoming a game designer. And then also was able to do music at the company, which was a really fantastic side effect of being able to work in-house there. Another thing I wrote and designed my own visual novel called Escape, which released in 2018. And now I am a freelance composer working on the 2 games mentioned, Earthblade and Beastie Ball, and then also working on my own new game. So part 1 of my talk is about growing up with games. This is sort of my entryway into how I learned about video games and video game music, and kind of entrenched myself in that sound. So I had a very early exposure. I started playing games around 1990, and I started on the NES. And so it was very much at a time when, here's this bullet point. You know the headline. Video game music isn't just bleeps and bloops anymore. And that's the common conception, right? That is what everyone kind of thinks. Video games either used to sound like or sounded like very recently. And this is a little clip that I managed to find of like the stereotypical video game sounds. So that's video game music in the minds of many people. But when I was introduced to games in 1990, they didn't really sound like that. They, obviously had lo-fi synthesis, chiptune music. But this is, an example of what video game music was sounding like in 1990 when I started playing games. So, to my ears, that sounds a lot more than bleeps and bloops. There's a lot going on there. That is sophisticated writing. It's incredible composition. It's prog rock. It's all of this stuff. But the thing is, this is how games sounded. But the thing is, this music isn't just game music. It is synth music with limitations. And that's kind of how video game music formed, was not necessarily by just kind of, doing what the hardware could, but by pushing that limitation and to get as much incredible music out of these sounds as possible. And these limitations that game music had defined the aesthetic and the style, influenced by a lot of different factors, which I will get into. So yeah, it helped create a style unlike anything else, in my opinion. So what was formative for me growing up at this time? Like I mentioned, I started playing games around 1990. I played the Nintendo Entertainment System and Game Boy. Hardware-generated music at the time used 4-channel playback and waveform synthesis. So it was, very limited synthesizer hardware, but it was still providing, these sort of rudimentary building blocks of synthesis. And then I moved on to the Sega Genesis eventually, which uses FM synthesis, a different type of synthesizer. And then there was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which had onboard sample playback, 8 simultaneous channels, so you could do even bigger arrangements, even more realistic sounds to a degree. And then, of course, with CD media, with the Sega CD and PlayStation, Saturn, all of those game systems, they used onboard sample playback as well, with even more sample channels, and then also CD audio. So then the limitations start to get, taken off a little bit, and we go more into what is the actual recording technology of the time. So I'm going to talk about mostly the sort of formative on board hardware synthesis. So on the NES and Game Boy, I was introduced to music that was inspired by 2 to 3 voice counterpoint. So you can go all the way back to, say Bach and, counterpoint and fugues and all of these things that have these limitations imposed upon them. But then here's hardware that can only do those things. And so they can emulate those sorts of compositions. 3 to 4 piece bands, you can do that with 3 to 4 channels of audio. Super Nintendo and PS1, they, because of the increased but still limited channel playback, you could have, say, chamber orchestras or small orchestral ensembles. And then the produced music of the mid to late 90s for the CD-based media of the time. So when you look back at all of that, video game music did not just emerge in a bubble. there were a number of key influential bands and groups and composers at the time that really helped form some of that early musical vocabulary. And I'm not going to really talk about the music theory of it all that much, but more about the aesthetics, the arrangement, those sorts of things that helped to define the sound. And so a lot of early video game music that inspired me specifically originated from Japan in the 90s. The inspirations were as varied as the music itself. But there were, like I mentioned, several bands that were popular in the 70s and 80s that were formative to early game composers. And then also film and animation scores around the time became big influences once a larger ensemble sound could be created. And then, of course, the band members that were influential also began to get involved in video games. We'll cover a little bit of that. So the big one in the room for me, I think, is Yellow Magic Orchestra. They were a band that was hugely influential in synthesizer music in the late 70s. They had a very symbiotic relationship with early arcade games. Their debut album basically even had sampled sound effects and little riffs and stuff from Space Invaders and a game called The Circus on their album, because they were playing these games that constantly. It was this huge boom of arcade culture in Japan, and so they were working with synthesizers. They were playing games that had synthesizers built into the hardware. And so it was only natural that they started sampling and using those sounds and creating music that was inspired and then also inspired games. So they took, at the time, what people thought of as bleeps and bloops. And this is actually, at a time where things were quite literally bleeps and bloops, with the sound effects primarily, not a whole lot of looping background music in games at this point. But then they turned them into compositions. And I think that's the really important part, because their style of synth compositions would then go on to inspire hundreds of composers, myself included, and many others in the early video game music composition scenes, and are credited also as being the parents, among the parents of modern synth music, alongside bands like Kraftwerk. And video game music was not really known of as video game music until there was a collaboration between Namco, which was also seeing a big boom in the arcades, and they collaborated with YMO member Haruomi Hosono and created the very first video game music album, literally called Video Game Music. And that coined the term, and then it sort of made it official. That's where it was. So YMO also has a very interesting history with video game music, because they were inspired by video games and they wrote compositions. But then also one of their compositions specifically was used in a video game. And I wanted to share an example of that. So here's the song Raideen, written in 1979 by YMO, and it's one of my favorites. So play a little clip of that. So then in 1982, there was a Sega arcade game called Super Locomotive. And you can kind of see where they came to that conclusion. There's the intro sounds a little bit sort of like, an engine kind of, going on a track. And they recreated the song with onboard hardware arcade hardware synths, and it sounded like this. And so you can hear, by taking their original song and sort of literally transposing it to that sort of limited chiptune palette, you really hear those connections. You hear what they were writing and then also what video game musicians at the time were writing as well. And it was very much hand in hand, kind of going in the same direction, I feel. Another example of video game music lineage comes from the band Dreams Come True. And this is one that's pretty close to me because I grew up playing a game that I'll reveal in a second, had a very close connection to this band. They were formed in 1988 by Miwa Yoshida and Masato Nakamura. They were a duo specifically, kind of doing just like pop music. Prior to forming, they also did some other songs as a duo, and they released a demo of a song called Sweet Dream. And I want to play that for you here. It's low bit rate, so bear with me. Really pretty songwriting. And then what happened is that Nakamura from Dreams Come True would then go on to become the composer for Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog series, specifically for Sonic 1 and 2. So then the ending song for Sonic 2 went back to that little song, Sweet Dream, also called Sweet, Sweet, Sweet. Sometimes I think there's, it uses both titles, and then arranged it for the Genesis's FM synthesis chip. And so the ending of Sonic 2 is that song, but played back on the Genesis. And that song just, they became popular, and they actually started performing it in their live concerts again. And a really fun thing, I'll only play a little bit of this because it's kind of silly, but in 2022, the duo would also collaborate on a version of Sweet Dream in a Sonic tribute. And they collaborated with some artists. But I think the interesting thing that you can hear in this is that it's the original song, now sung in English, but then also the synth instrumentation has a lot of callbacks to that original FM synthesis sound. So you can kind of hear that brassy synth sound come in. So you can hear, it's all of those influences kind of coming full circle again, and then just the current callback to 80s style music production again is sort of revitalizing a lot of those sounds. Another example, a very, very, very important one called T-Square. They were a jazz fusion band formed in 1976, starting with a little bit more of a acoustic sound, but then very quickly in the 80s adopted synths into their sound and are still active to this day. They're creating incredible music. They were really influential on a lot of Japanese composers, but then also you might hear a lot of influence in modern Nintendo composers. You can hear their influence across games like Mario Kart, Wii Sports, and a whole lot more. And here's another little example of that. So here's a song they wrote, Omens of Love, in 1985. And already you can kind of hear, some of that modern Nintendo sound directly in this track. You can almost hear like the Mario Golf announcer going, "Nice on." But then the founding guitarist Masahiro Ando actually would go on to be a game composer himself. He specifically worked on the Artha Lad series, but then even more prominently now as the Gran Turismo series. But speaking of Artha Lad, it was a PS1 RPG series, and it was released the first game was released in 1995. And I just wanted to play an example of what it sounded like on the hardware using its playback there. And then after that, there's an orchestral arranged version, which calls back to their original sound. So you can kind of hear how that's influencing his own style for games and then the arrangement of it. And then the arranged version. We very much hear that he's a guitarist, it's amazing that he is still going on today, because he also recently released last year. He was the creator of the main theme of the Gran Turismo series called Moon Over the Castle, that debuted with Gran Turismo 3. And then a version of that was released in Gran Turismo 7 last year. So you can hear the sound kind of continuing to change, with modern production technique, but it's still the same guy. It's the same, it's kind of sound that was originated back in the 90s and the 80s. So, Masahiro Ando continues strong to this day. And as a little side note, before I go into my last example, I was recently, as of this year, invited to collaborate on the Gran Turismo movie score, which was this wild collaboration between a whole bunch of composers, along with Lauren Balfe, the primary composer on the score. And while I was asked to contribute some synths and other things to one of the main themes, I managed to sneak in a little Easter egg. I don't know if it's actually in the score. I haven't seen it in theaters yet, but I did. If you heard the opening riff there of Moon Over the Castle, the da 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 da, if you listen closely to the organ part that I put into this little clip here, you can kind of hear a little reference that I snuck in. If it's going to play. There we go. So one little example of me trying to be reverential in the modern compositions that I'm doing. And the last example that I wanted to share is a band called Zuntata. And they are the house band for the game developer Taito. And you may know them from a game called Space Invaders. That was one of their original, breakout hits, and was also one of the games that inspired Yellow Magic Orchestra. And so eventually, Taito would go on to form an in-house band, and it has sort of become the company's sound department. They worked on franchises such as the Darius series, Xevious, all sorts of like fun shoot 'em up games. And now mostly works on the arcade game Groove Coaster. But they had this really unique synth pop style. In 1994, they released a game called Darius Gaiden, and then they released the original soundtrack version of a song called Fake. And so I wanted to play this version as a point of comparison. Very unique sound. I love all the use of samples in there. But the fun thing about Zuntata is that because they're also a band, then they can play their scores live in concert. And so they had a number of concerts that they played, including this song live in 1998, which I'll play back here. It's all the same sounds, but all loaded up on keyboards, played live, real drums, all that. It's all the, sort of feeding back into itself. And what I love about this example is that they sort of continued the legacy of Yellow Magic Orchestra, who were inspired by Space Invaders, made by Taito, and then formed in-house band to compose for future games. And it really sort of goes to reflect the symbiotic nature between pop music, rock music, game music, synth music, everything is all kind of feeding into itself. It's not just an isolated bubble. And so now we get into part 3, where I talk about reverence, which is, sorry, I'm being illuminated by my screen because it's still dark here, where I talk about the particular influences that game music has had on me. And when I talk about reverence, I'm not necessarily talking about writing chiptune, writing exactly in the style of old video game music, but by taking inspiration from the roots of where video game music came from, where I was inspired by the games that I played, I can sort of take that and build that into my own aesthetic and my own style and really celebrate the composers and what inspired them. So an example of something passed down and reinterpreted. This is one of 2 sort of storylines that I'll present here. In 1990, as I mentioned, I played NES games for the first time. One of those games that I played was Ninja Gaiden 2. It was a incredible, just like side-scrolling action game, had a really cool score. It stuck with me. At the time, they had a sound test mode, and I would hook up my tape recorder to the TV. I would record the sound test. So I made my own little video game music albums and listened to it over and over again. And one of the tracks that really stuck with me was a track called Overdrive, written by Origuchi Nita. And that was, the whole soundtrack was very kind of rock inspired. And you can hear that translated into the NES chiptune style. You can hear the arrangement. You know, it doesn't even have to, you know, be interpreted all that much. Like, you've got the drum kit in there, you've got the synth arpeggio, you've got the guitar, rhythm guitar going, you've got all that stuff in there. So fast forward all the way to 2013. I was working at ArenaNet. I was doing content stuff on Guild Wars 2, and there was a fun opportunity that came along. There was a little sort of April Fool's joke that was turned into a real game called Super Adventure Box, which was this sort of 8-bit throwbacks and a retro style throwback inside of Guild Wars 2, but the soundtrack specifically was this sort of 8-bit throwback to chiptune style. And so there was an area that had a sort of mechanic to it, very similar to the levels that I remembered in Ninja Gaiden 2, where there was this sort of storm that was pushing you back, and like, you know, you're really kind of like fighting against wind currents and all that stuff. And so for that area, I was inspired by Ninja Gaiden 2, and I wrote this song called Stormtop. And so you can hear how I took those influences and translated it very directly into a chiptune style. A lot of fun. But the story doesn't end there, because it was then taken and reinterpreted. Because there was a metal artist who was a big fan of Guild Wars 2 called Dusk, and they took this song and then did a metal cover of it, which then kind of brings it back to the inspirations that potentially inspired Ninja Gaiden 2 and was passed down through here. And so then you have my song reinterpreted for this metal cover. So you can hear the lineage that was passed down there. And like I mentioned, from Rock Bands to NES hardware to emulated NES hardware back to Rock Band. And then the second example, this is one that I'm calling inspiration across multiple generations, because this is an example of a composer inspiring another composer, inspiring me, and then other inspirations coming in. So on March 11th, 1984, well, first off, I was about less than a month old. However, also at the same time, Nazca of the Valley of the Wind, which is an incredible movie by Studio Ghibli, released in theaters. In one scene, that's Bobbin, say hello. No, don't be distracted by my cat. Pay very close attention to the little melodic riff there and the instrumentation, because in my personal, I don't know if this is a fact or not, but in my personal sort of reinterpretation of events, maybe a young Yasunori Mitsuda was in the audience of a showing of Nausicaa, gets that little earworm, and helps fuel his passion for music. Then in 1995, the video game Chrono Trigger releases, and it was scored by Yasunori Mitsuda as his debut game soundtrack. And then in that game, there's this track. Beautiful music, one of my favorite game compositions from that era. But you can hear there's a little seed of an idea. There was inspiration that came from that tune by Joe Hisaishi. And now ignore the melodic part that's similar. Go back and remember the choral samples. There's a very iconic sound. A lot of RPGs of the 16-bit era would have a sort of like very just kind of like choral pad sound. But I played Chrono Trigger around 1998. I was a little late to playing it, but I was obsessed. It was one of my favorite games of all time, it still is, and the soundtrack really fueled my passion for music. And then specifically, that choir sample spoke to me, and it has that sort of like emotional resonance, even more than just like a live choir. And so I, took that sound, and I was able to find it from the 16-bit rip of the sound files that were in Chrono Trigger, and incorporated that into my sort of personal sound library. So then in 2018, the game Celeste released, little known indie title, and then went on to become a big success. And then in that game, I wrote this track called Quiet and Falling, and I'll pay very close attention to the choir sounds. There's just something about that sound that really it stirs something in me. I could have used a more realistic choir library. I could have used real singers. I could have used anything, but I chose that sound specifically because it spoke to me and really had that emotional resonance in it. And, you know, I don't know if that resonates with everyone else, but to me, specifically as a composer, that was something that I really held dear to me and wanted to use that sound. But that wasn't the only inspiration for that song. And so I want to talk about a little game called Lack of Love. In the year 2000, Ryuichi Sakamoto, who is a founding member of Yellow Magic Orchestra, was off on his own career. He was doing incredible scores for films. He was acting. He was doing all sorts of things, creating amazing solo music, piano music, orchestral music. But he wanted to work on a video game. He wanted to help design one. And so he collaborated with an incredible indie team in Japan called Lovdelic. They are the creators of groundbreaking games like Tulip and Moon Remix RPG, which just recently got re-released on a whole bunch of platforms. I think Steam and Switch. But it was a really formative game for a lot of people, and so he collaborated with Lovdelic and designed this game called Lack of Love, and it was. And he also did the score for it. And so despite the game never releasing in the US, I somehow managed to get a copy of the soundtrack through legitimate means, I'm sure. And the title theme for that game really just stirred me in a way that I never felt. It really influenced a lot of how I wrote emotional ambient music. And I didn't know who Ryuichi Sakamoto was at the time. I wasn't, sort of well-versed in sort of the lineage of his music, of YMO's music, but that piece of music really stuck out to me. And I want to play it for you because going back to Quiet and Falling, you can kind of hear that influence in there. And in general, this is just one of my favorite pieces of music, so I want to play that. And so I hope you can kind of hear that. I hope you hear how all of this kind of comes full circle, because it's all this symbiotic relationship between music, not just in video games, not just in film scores, not just in, all of these different things, but like everything is sort of informing and paying reverence to itself as we kind of go and develop music for games and for everything else. And it's something that really stirs me, I think. And so as we come to the conclusion of the talk, I want to just give a little bit of an overview of how I celebrate the history of game music as composition. And it's, to break it down in a slightly more mechanical way, like it comes in compositional style. How I write music was influenced by these composers who were influenced by these other composers. It is this passing down of music composition, use of counterpoint, arpeggiated chords, arrangement, how we sort of create the aesthetic of music. And a lot of, one thing I didn't actually include in this slide is a good friend of mine, Ivy, They are an incredible composer, worked with their partner Surashu on the series Steven Universe. They continue to write incredible music. And they really helped cultivate this this sort of community of like-minded composers like myself who grew up inspired by video game music and by the music of this era, and we kind of call it digital fusion. And it's really this, you know, kind of taking that building block of chiptune, of jazz fusion, of all of these sources, and kind of like how do we reference this music, how do we kind of talk about it. And so digital fusion was something that they came up with as a sort of a term to, you know, refer to all of this type of music. It can also come in instrument choice. I like to use a lot of old samples in my compositions, a lot of old synths, as a direct reference to the sounds that I grew up with, but also because they are just emotionally resonant with me. You know, someone who grew up listening to a ton of piano music or a ton of you know, oboe music would use those sounds in their compositions because it inspires them. In the same way, I grew up with the sounds as they were created on hardware in the 90s and early 2000s. And so those are the sounds that inspire me. So I want to reuse those. I want to give them more life. Also, using classic styles of effects, there's a really fun plugin called SNES Reverb, which basically takes the style of reverb that a Super Nintendo system would do, where they're kind of doing a delay-based reverb, but tuned in the same sort of way that a hardware reverb might work. So I use that sometimes to kind of evoke that old style that was iconic to the hardware at the time. And then also adapting music across different arrangement styles. So within the same piece of music, like for example, I'll have old, you know, retro style sounds, but then also bring in live sounds and bring in arrangement within the piece, or as a leitmotif later that comes back with a full arrangement, or maybe I'll bring it down to just kind of like a more chiptune retro inspired sound, either as a tonal change or as, you know, something that's kind of a little silly, you know, a little reverential, you know, whatever that is. People are doing it all the time. There was even a game that was recently announced called Unicorn Overlord. It is a game by Vanillaware, and they very little information is known about it at this point. But one thing I took notice of is that they announced it as it's going to have this big orchestral, you know, fantasy score, but they're also doing a Super Nintendo demake score. And, you know, to kind of add, to be a callback to the sort of reverential like style that Hitoshi Sakimoto and, you know, the rest of the composers that worked on this game used to do on Super Nintendo hardware for the Ogre Battle series and all these things that the game was inspired by. And so you have all of this interplay between old styles and new styles. And I think incorporating that and being reverential to it is really fun. And then ultimately, my this was the template style called main point. So I'm going to make my main point. Game music has a rich and self-referential history. It didn't just go, as a lot of articles will say, from bleeps and bloops to live orchestral performances. There is so much nuance. There is so much incredible history and rich interplay between all of the different styles of music that have inspired game music to come, you know, across the generations and form into what it is today, which is just everything. Anything can be video game music. And I think that is wonderful. And I think we should be celebrating that. It shouldn't just be the big orchestral scores, the big Hollywood inspired things. Like everything is a part of video game music. And I think it deserves to be celebrated. And that's my talk. I don't know if I'm going to be opening up for questions, but I would love to hear your questions if you have any.
I'm going to pass the microphone around.
Hello.
Questions?
No, I didn't.
Hey, Alina.
Hello.
So seeing this and hearing your music, one can say that you have like a really, really distinct style, which is amazing and is something really hard to achieve. And it's really nice to see where this style is coming from. But often, as composers, we may um, encounter suggestions that or requests, let's say it that way, that will ask us to do things that are like out of what we usually do. Or so, if you have been in that situation, how do you do it while keeping your own voice? If you know what I mean, while keeping your own style.
Yeah, I think a lot of that really comes down to the conversation that you're having with the game studio or with the audio lead that you're working with, the director on the project, whoever it might be. Because I mean, for me, I'm hugely I'm really blessed to have the ability to field requests for work where, because I have, you know, this style that people recognize, you know, people will come to me for that style. And I think that's really difficult to kind of like bring a perspective of like, well, someone is saying, hey, write something that's not your style. But, you know, obviously a lot of composers need to be adaptive and to kind of to compose to what the target is. And I think a lot of that can be kind of like a negotiation of sorts, where like, you know, you do need to obviously, you know, fit the job and to sort of find the style that resonates with the collaborator that you're working with. But by cultivating the projects and the, you know, sort of instrumentation that you're bringing to that, making suggestions, making potentially, you know, meeting someone halfway on a sort of decision like that, I think can sort of help to kind of push that aesthetic towards something that both gives you life as a composer and also meets the requirements of the project. It's a difficult thing to do, for sure, especially, you know, coming out the gate, working for brand new projects. And, you know, one thing that was a benefit to me is that I released a lot of music outside of games, just at the start of just like releasing my own album to be like, this is the kind of music that I love to write. And, you know, for something like, say, Guild Wars, I was writing music that was inspired by Guild Wars. You know, I had to be sort of in that orchestral style. But as I went, you know, as I kept coming back for more work, I was asked to sort of bring more of my own self into that composition. So I think, you know, it's a gradual thing, you know, where you have the project that needs a certain style, but if they are comfortable with you, if they are, you know, respectful of the style of music that you write, then you can sort of really kind of ramp up on things that really resonate with you as a composer. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Totally. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have plenty of time more on after the panel that's coming right after. So
That's
if you have
right,
any more
yeah.
questions, you can also ask them there. And pass the word to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lena. It was super interesting and inspiring. It will be interesting to see where the history continues. And Lena will be around for the next panel, the last post on the program for today. So we'll have a 5-minute break now, and see you soon. Then we're starting again. We have come to the last post on today's program, which is another great panel. The panel is called Music Beyond Boundaries, and it's a conversation between Lena Rain and Perry Winkle, aka Claudia Cox from Artist Duo Slime, which we will get to know better tomorrow. And it's moderated by Alex Espeseth, who is a game audio composer and PhD candidate within game audio. So please take it away. I'm giving him a round of applause.
All right. Do you hear us?
Yes, hello. I am
Awesome.
looming giant behind you, apparently. Hello.
Hello.
All right.
Nice to meet you.
Let's do this. I'm super excited to do this because I got to make the questions myself, so I can ask whatever I want. But I am excited to hear about like the creative process behind making music for games or just like an artist as well. So I'm just going to get to it because we don't have too much time and I want to ask a lot of questions. So at what point did you know that you want to work with music and what inspired you to pursue it professionally?
Oh, should I go first?
Yeah, why not?
Sure. Goodness, I basically grew up with music. My dad was a composer and fiddle player, so we had music in the house pretty much constantly. I just, obviously, I played lots of video games, like I mentioned in my talk, and so the music from video games really inspired me to pursue that as something that I wanted to emulate myself. And so as soon as I was able to have my own synthesizer, my own software to start writing music, I was just immediately just essentially taking video game music and like transcribing it, and then I would take those lessons from transcribing and kind of apply it to my own music. So it was really kind of a natural process of growing up surrounded by music. I was in choirs at the time as well, and just, it was just something that I wanted to do. It was how I expressed myself.
All right.
Cool.
Awesome.
Hi. Yeah, I also grew up with music. My mom, I actually started playing violin when I was 2 years old. I grew up in Australia, and my mom's a Suzuki violin teacher, and I grew up a lot with Suzuki violin and a lot of Japanese people in my life when I grew up. My teacher Haru is amazing. Yeah, so I was very obsessed with practicing and playing really fast, and so I did that quite a lot, and then I ended up moving to Norway to study violin. But how I'm here right now is I'm asking myself that question. I think at some point it wasn't enough to be somebody's violinist. I guess I played in prog bands and did classical music. It's kind of my background. And then actually 2 years ago, I had an accident where I fell on my head. It was, rather brutal. And I was kind of out of the game for, some time. And I couldn't do anything. Had a really bad concussion. I guess through that void of not being able to use my arms or my brain, I started writing music and singing, and now I'm here, and I've made a death opera with Toby. This game thing we'll talk about tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about that talk as well.
That's awesome.
So you both have like musical backgrounds. That's interesting to hear. It's kind of runs in the family. And it's,
for me, my father is really not a music person.
So it's from your mom's side?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay. But when you compose or write music as an artist or a composer, I'm interested to see, how does your creative process look like? Do you open your DAW and just start mashing buttons, or is it like a research thing, or are you singing into your phone and just keeping all your voice memos until the day comes? You're like, yeah, I'm going to use this. What's the process?
Do you mind if I start, Lena?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I think it kind of varies. Sometimes I go into the studio thinking, okay, I want to make this song, or I want to make this like Steve Reich pop song, something weird, and that happened one time. And then other times, I think I just really like annoying melodies that stick in my head, so I'll just be constantly singing them over and over again. And then other times, we did in the summer, me and Only Slime here made an album. And we had this rule where we couldn't listen to the new song the next day. So we made like 40 songs or something.
Oh,
and
wow.
then we weren't allowed to listen to it, which is kind of really annoying because you just want to listen to it and feel it and work on it. But we didn't do that. And then it was really fun to like kill them afterwards.
Yeah, so you made like this huge bank and started looking back.
Yeah, and that was a new process for me. I'm not sure if you do or have, yeah, Elena.
Oh goodness, I mean, I kind of did that. Well, when I did my EP called Singularity, I wrote a number of tracks, and eventually, I mean, I didn't write like 40. It wasn't a huge list like that, but I did write like a whole bunch of tracks for that, and then eventually I had to cut some because it just wasn't flowing with all of the tracks in there, and so I cut it all the way down to 4, and so that's what the actual album became. But as far as like my actual composition process goes, like I'm a constant like, sing, I hum things out loud. I sing to myself. I'm just, my wife can attest that I'm just constantly sort of singing to myself, especially in the shower, like in the morning. Like I'll just, especially if I know like I have a composition that I need to do, I'll just like sort of surround myself and like, okay, this is the character that I'm working with. This is the area for a game that I'm working with or something. And I'll just kind of like surround myself with that. And then when I'm in that sort of white noise environment of the shower, like I'll just, it's just, you just hear nothing. And then I just start singing to myself, and it can be very awkward sometimes because I'll be like, oh shoot, that's really good. I need to write that down before I forget it. And so I'll get my phone, and luckily they're more water resistant these days, but I'll grab it and record a voice memo of just me just singing it out to myself, and hopefully I remember the context later.
Yeah, like I'm excited to hear about like with the years, especially for you, like writing for music, but also for you, have you been training to turn on your like creative faucet? Like you can write almost music on commando instead of like you have to kind of get in the zone. Like you can just turn it on. Is that something you guys have been training on?
I think if
oh
yeah, you go.
Oh, sorry, go.
No.
I'm honestly kind of bad at that. I I really need to get the inspiration. If I try to force it, it ends up sounding forced, if that makes sense. And luckily I have a freelance schedule. Like I don't have to be like, I have to write one piece every day, sort of a thing for my projects. Like I have the sort of long period of time of game development to work on things. So I do at least have, I have the freedom to have bad days. And I really needed to sort of tell myself that it was okay, that if it's not coming today, then I can wait and sit on it. And eventually I will be in the right frame of mind to compose what I'm looking for. Right. But sometimes it just comes unexpectedly. Sometimes I'll be really creative and just be like, well, I need to get something down and just, write it. But that just comes from years of practice, honestly.
Yeah, I think I guess I would agree, yes. I lost my train of thought because I was listening to you so much. What was the question?
Yeah, what was the question? No, like if you're able to like turn on your creativity whenever you want, or it doesn't have to be like you have to get into the mood.
Yeah, I also think it's like really good and also really annoying when you have to like, I'm wrapping up my album with Perry now, and I think it's really fun, but it's also like kind of really, I'm not sure about you, Lena, or you, but it's really painful actually, because I really enjoy just like the songwriting part, like just when you get that kick, that's like, that fuels you so much. But the painful stuff, like just doing the annoying, it's also not annoying, it's also nice. But I also like that, because then when you have the day to go, the next day when you get free to write, then it's really fun, and I get really excited about that. Yeah.
You're just getting the
Yeah,
fire.
I agree with that actually, where
Yeah.
like the having multiple things to do, I think really it helps to get inspired when you need to, because if you have something to go work on that's not being like immediately creative, like then you can kind of busy yourself with the other tasks like mixing or doing like emails or whatever it is. Like, you know, if you have something else, like I'll do, you know, writing, like I'll work on something for my game or something like that. And while I'm doing that, then I get inspired to sort of go back to do music, and it kind of like, it ping pongs back and forth sometimes, where you really need to like kind of keep things changing to really get inspired in all the different places you need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of occupies the whole brain, not just the creative part.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a big one for me, and I think a lot of, especially Scandinavians, but imposter syndrome. That's sadly a big part of artists and composers every day. Have you experienced that writing music and for games and as an artist? Like, how do you deal with it?
Well, I feel imposter syndrome right now, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
Going through it like everyone else. I'm not sure. What do you all, hands up for imposter syndrome? I don't know. I guess like everyone. Wow.
Yeah, like for me, constantly, it's you know, it's kind of unavoidable. Like I'm also, you know, Scandinavian, so I've got the heritage there. But the constant feeling of, especially anytime I put out something new, it's always like, is anyone going to actually care about this one? Like, you know, even if though I had like, you know, big successes in the past, you know, it's kind of like the new thing is like, but this is different. This isn't what they liked, you know? And so it's like this constant sort of conversation of like, no, it's okay. You know, people will appreciate the stuff you work on. And, you know, I try to tell that to other composers as well, that are dealing with imposter syndrome. It's like, you know, people come to this for you. You're doing something new. You know, there's a meme of like an artist looking at like a cake that they made or something, and it's like this cake isn't as good as this other cake, and then the audience is like, wow, 2 cakes. You know, you really get that. You know, you get that feeling a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of jarring that even if you make music and you know it's good and people tell you it's good, you still feel the imposter syndrome. It's really...
Yeah.
I feel like also if you're doing, I do a lot of different types of things. So I do like acrobatics and now all of this other stuff, music things. And the combination of it makes me feel more imposter, because I feel like I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know why it makes me feel imposter, but of course it somehow does.
Kind of dipping your toes in different
Yeah,
subjects.
and maybe because your level isn't at the level you'd want to be at if you were only doing that one thing.
Yeah.
Which kind of, but I've learned to embrace it.
Is that like a result of how we are with upbringing as musicians? We are told to be like the best. We're looking at our heroes. Maybe that's a thing that we kind of get fueled to just be the best, and then we kind of get too scared to even release our own music.
Yeah, and also maybe this individualized thing that you're meant to do kind of one thing. I was brought up with being like, okay, when I did gymnastics, my gym coach told my violin teacher, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you should just do one thing and focus on that. That kind of vibe. I guess that's kind of, I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent now. But yeah. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, yeah, for sure. Okay, I know we're talking about music and all that jazz. But I'm kind of interested in, do you have any activity outside of music that kind of helps you focus as an artist and a composer? Like, is there, say, yoga, traveling, hiking, whatever? Is there something that you that makes you kind of get more into it and kind of lets you release everything else that's not music?
Yeah, many things.
Yeah.
Well, I really like doing acrobatics because I do it with music sometimes, but something about being flown around, I don't feel my body so much, and that feels really nice. Also flying, I think, I don't know about you too, but like sitting in a plane and listening to music is super nice.
Yeah,
or a podcast or something, because you're inside your own world. There's no obligation, you're just there. I like that. I also like Formula One really much, like I really
Nice.
love, yeah.
I also watch Formula One.
Oh, cool. I'm a Hamilton fan.
Nice.
And you, Lena?
Oh goodness. Yeah, I mean, just I do. We actually have a local Formula One group that gets together. Some like indie game developers in the area. We watch it on Sundays.
Cute.
I wouldn't say that necessarily inspires me to write music. I mostly just think of the theme song constantly as da 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 da. Like we joke about putting together like a F1 theme arrange album or something, because we just constantly hear it every week.
That would be great.
Yeah, I would stream repeat.
You want to participate in that? But the my cat is just meowing constantly. Hello, Bobbin. You exist. Yeah, hello.
Did you say your cat was named Bobbin?
Her name's Bobbin, yeah.
Oh.
I don't know if she's gonna get a Bobbin today. No. She's been frisky. Playing with my cat. I love my cat. And so sometimes she inspires me. But no, I think, I don't know. I refer to myself as boring. I just play a lot of video games. I like to read. I read a lot of like manga. I read a lot of like novels, nonfiction stuff. Reading about topics that interest me can really kind of spark that creative drive, not just for music, but for writing, for creating worlds, for doing all the sorts of things that I love to do. Especially more recently, just like reading about, I have an entire book about, sorry, just heard a big sound. Bobbin is okay. I just read an entire book about fungi and mushrooms and how they're connected into the ecosystem of the world and everything, and how they'll survive well after we're gone and all that stuff. And like learning about, nature and about space and science and all sorts of incredible topics that just are, beyond my expertise, but, I love to learn as much as I can about them. It really like helps to inform me as a creator, as someone that's bringing new stuff into this world, to, learn more about the world that I'm bringing music into, if that makes sense.
For sure, yeah.
Elena, do you have mushrooms close to you? Do you go mushroom picking?
No, there's woods. I could definitely do that, but I'm a little too scared.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I'm not an expert on identifying mushrooms, but I love to read about them. So.
Yeah, that's cool.
What do you call it? Cantarell?
Yeah, cantarell.
Yeah. I went on a mushroom picking like 2 days ago.
Oh,
It's really
awesome.
There's so many right now.
Yeah, it's like really good. And also, tangent, sorry. There's a really good documentary on mushroom on Netflix. You should totally check it out.
Oh, yeah.
Really
I think I know which one you're talking about. It's really good.
Okay, mushroom talk done. I'm wondering, like, as artists and composers, kind of what do you believe is the best way to reach the people to get a gig or a freelance job? How do you get out there to actually get those jobs? Like, how do you get a contract as an artist? What do you recommend people doing to get out there?
For me, one thing that it's out of my control is just accidentally having a game blow up and being success, and suddenly now there's people looking to hire me, and that was completely accidental, and not accidental, but it was something that happened to me that allowed me to have my name out there and get work. But honestly, like even getting that job was a matter of just releasing music, putting music out there, making it available, showing who you are as an artist. I think is one of the most valuable things you can do, befriending people in the industry that aren't just, your fellow composers, but programmers and writers and all of that, all that stuff to really, just if you're friends with people that make games and you are a talented person that is working in that field, like you kind of naturally come together, like you want to work on stuff together. And so, a lot of new gigs have come from just, the friends that I've made by networking, which is the best form of networking is befriending people and getting to know them, and to get to know them on a level that's not just your commonalities in the industry, is just who are they as a person, what are they like in life and in games and all that stuff, and you want to collaborate together. That's my favorite collaborations, at least.
Sure.
I'm still figuring it out. I'm an independent artist and just released my second single, I guess.
Awesome.
But my very first one, I sent so many emails. I felt like a bot. It was just way too much. I guess a lot of us do that.
Yeah.
But I sent it to P3, like the Norwegian national radio, and I was like, no, they're not gonna, like, I'm just an artist sending an email, like this is just gonna go to spam. Nobody's gonna listen to it, let alone playlist it. And then they anbefalt, or like recommended it,
yeah.
Gave it a review and was added to some playlists, and
Awesome.
I was shocked actually. Yeah.
Awesome.
But only because I just dared to send the email.
Yeah.
Actually.
Kind of dare to believe in your own product. Yeah, that's awesome.
Putting yourself out there is
Yeah.
the best form of
and I guess
being self-assured.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Something.
Actually,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Showing up and doing your thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, Lena, you talked a little bit about what inspires you to write music with like old city pop and old games. It really hit my heart, but I'm really interested into hearing what are you currently inspired by? Like what artists, games, movies, books, I don't know, cats, whatever. What inspires you right now when you write music?
Right now, I can talk about my current inspirations for through the games that I've played. Like I just came off of a 70-hour playthrough of a recent game, Armored Core 6, which is incredible game, giant robots from Software. It's the first game in the series since 10 years ago, and I love giant robots. Like I love Gundam, I love Evangelion, any sort of giant robot thing. I'm really into it. So I was already a mark for this series, but the soundtrack for that game is incredible. It's soundtrack. It's a collaboration between Kota Hoshino, who has worked on the series for many, many, many years, and then Shoei Mizawa, who is a relatively young composer. He got his start working on Elden Ring, giant From Software game, incredible score, big orchestral bombast, and it was his first non-sound designer gig he as a composer, and it really blew me away. His compositions in an orchestral style were just some of the best in the game. And then here he comes into Armored Core, which is a game about big gritty synths, and like it really just feels rusty and unhinged, and there's this incredible sound design to the synth music that they wrote for this series, where especially for this game, where they take this synth sound and really just like pitch shift it all over the place. And so you go into like an area for a mission, and suddenly the synth is going and just like it's really just kind of like what is happening with the tonality of this piece. And it's just this really cool aesthetic that I am just like totally floored by and really inspired by right now.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm really I'm not sure if anybody knows Galen Tipton.
What do you call it?
Galen Tipton, artist.
I haven't heard about it.
America. Really great sound design, and like really ASMR, and it feels like they're right inside your brain. Yeah, it's really, really sweet. I really like that. And other music, I really love Sheena Ringo, if anybody knows that.
Yes,
also.
I love
Artist,
her.
Japanese, yeah. And then I used to really love black metal, I guess. And
Do
like,
you say black metal?
yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
You used to, or you still do?
Oh, I still do. I guess
Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
same with classical music. I just haven't listened to it that much recently, but I still love it.
Yeah.
Or like Author and Punisher also, American artist. And also a rapper. I don't know how it popped up, but called Clipping, and had extremely good sound design. And I was just,
yeah,
everything was just really interesting. But yeah, there's many artists that I'm inspired by all the time. Formula One is another thing that I'm constantly inspired by, but something else. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, do you find yourselves going back to your roots a lot when you with the violin, and you with growing up with old game music and Japanese city pop? Do you go back to your roots when you want to write music, or is that just something that kind of happens, or do you do it like deliberately?
I think it's definitely like something that's just kind of ingrained in me. I mean, like I mentioned in my talk, it's just kind of like how I write music is inspired, informed by all of these, my history with all of that. And specifically though, like right now, I'm actually working on a game score called a score for a game called Beastie Ball. And the score for that game is very directly referential to old, like specifically like Super Nintendo N64 era sampled instruments. So I've got a whole lot of like just the worst quality like guitar samples you could imagine, like worst in like a loving way, of just like, oh, this is crunchy, this is just kind of like it's like it's like very like farty sounds, it's like it's really fun sounds, and you can use them in comedic ways, you can use them in actual like serious ways, like depending on how you frame it. And so like I love going back to those sounds and finding new ways to use them in different ways, because like I said, like it's the roots, it's it's sort of where my music comes from, so exploring that is only natural.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's obvious whether I try to avoid it. I mean, I haven't released a lot yet, but the stuff coming up has like a lot of cinematic things, even like opera stuff that I didn't try to make happen. It just kind of happened in the production.
Yeah.
I think like a violinist, so it's easy to make a string orchestra. Like, but also then like I have this like electric butterfly violin, and then we tried running it through like autotune, and it sounds really funny. So that's I also really like autotune. I think it sounds fun.
For sure, like experimenting a little bit with mixing the old with the new, and just doing. I think that you're doing hyperpop, right?
Yeah, something in between there.
I feel like that's kind of feel like the thing with hyperpop. They're mixing old with new and taking aesthetic choices from 90s pop and 2000s pop, and like
and suddenly But I realized also recently that maybe sometimes I have again some stuff that I haven't released yet, but like win or lose sounds in a chorus. I have two different choruses of the same chorus, but then I'm not sure which is win and I'm not sure which one is lose, but they both sound really different. That's something fun to do more of.
Talking about chorus, I found myself having like 4 chorus pedals, and I want to scale it down to 1. So I just shut them up in a chain and turn on all of them, and ended up being a new chorus sound. So I kept all of them.
It's perfect.
What happens? That's how we do it. I'm just going to ask
4
if there
choruses.
What?
Sometimes you need 4 choruses.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I do have some more questions, but if the audience has questions, I want to be in favor of that. Yes. Where is the little square?
It's so cute, that square though, by the way. Oh my gosh.
And the throws have been really good.
Yeah, it was a good throw. Thank you. We got a question from the chat. Rob Bridges asks, what kind of game that does not yet exist would you love to work on?
Mm.
I think I would just love to
That's
work on a game in general. I haven't yet, as of yet, done that. So, but yeah, I would love to do that. Maybe something with snakes or like blood. I don't know. Yeah.
That's Australian in you talking.
Yeah.
Snakes and blood. Yeah. Blood snake. There you go. I'm currently working on a game that doesn't exist, that I'm making exist, if that counts.
I think that counts. Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, that's kind of like the creative drive, is like, if something doesn't exist, like you really want to make it. And so, you know, that's currently what I'm working on. But oh goodness, what game doesn't exist that I would? I don't know. Like there's something about, I would really love either to make or to work on a game that really like gives you the sensation of flight, like from like a bird's perspective, or like you know, like there's a lot of like VR experiences of like you are a bird or you are an airplane or something, you know, of like flying and stuff. But like there's something about flight specifically, and like that sort of immersive quality of just, you know, controlling like flaps and dives and all sorts of things. Like I know there's some games that probably fit the bill, but like there's a very specific quality of like bird flight I think would be a really fascinating thing to center a game around.
I'd also love to do like an album game.
Mm.
You know, I mean, I guess that's common, maybe.
Yeah.
That would be fun. Interactive.
Those are good.
Yeah.
For sure.
Huh.
Yes. Any more questions? Yes, go for it. Such good throws.
Are you always like inspired by your own music, or do you sometimes just really dislike your own music, but perhaps you still have to send it off? Like I've had experienced many times, being really dissatisfied with my music, but just not having like a deadline, so I have to send it off. Sometimes I, in some weeks, start to like it, or maybe in some months afterwards. But have you had the same experience, and how do you deal with that?
I'm feeling it right now because I'm finishing up my album, my debut album, and I'm super excited for that. But I think because I only just started songwriting, and I feel that I've just grown insanely much in the last 6 months, and so I'm just like, oh, why did I make? Why is that there? Why? I don't know, something like that. But I don't know how to deal with it. But embrace it. It can't change as well. And I think that's fun to just move on and create something new, because songs exist in their time capsule that they're being born into. And if you try to change it too much, you kind of ruin it anyway, unless you kill half of it and start it. I'm not sure. What about you, Lena?
Yeah, especially when I'm working on things that are kind of like exploring something new, like they're kind of a little out of my comfort zone. Like I really go through a period of like working on it, like in the hopes that it'll sound good, you know, in the hopes that like I'll actually like it. And so like I'll go through this process. Like I've been going through it a lot with Beastie Ball, the game I'm working on, where I'm like, I'll send over a work in progress and something and be like, I kind of hate it, but is this the right vibe? You know, and I'll get feedback, and you know, from the creator Greg Lobanov, who I'm collaborating with, and he'll be like, "This is incredible, keep going." And I was just like, maybe I don't know. And then I keep working on it, and eventually like something will click, and I'll just be like, oh, this is actually my favorite thing now. You know, you kind of have to push past that a lot of the time. And sometimes the track just doesn't work. You know, sometimes you just have to shelve it. And I think the biggest like learning factor of being an artist over a long period of time is that you learn to identify it sooner. So like I have a lot of like really simple sketches where I'm like, you know, kind of, you know, grooving with something, and then I'll be like, I don't see this song's future. And I'll just put it away, start something new. Or maybe I'll just start a whole bunch of things in the same project and like, this is the one I'm going with. so through experience, you kind of learn to identify like when you're not really jiving with something versus like, I hate it now, but maybe I'll like it later.
Also, if I may, I would like to thank you, Lena, for your great soundtrack, especially on Celeste. It really inspired me some years back, and I actually made a YouTube video about the soundtrack, talking about it and analyzing it because I really loved it. So thank you so much. It's one of the reasons I'm doing video game music now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That means a lot to hear.
All right. There's two behind you there. Yeah.
Hey there, this is a question for you, Lena, and congratulations on all your endeavors. Earlier today we had a session talking about copyright and and the problems we experience about signing away your publishing rights and writer shares, which is kind of unheard of, at least in Europe. Just wanted to, what is your experience on this? And do you sign off? Do you keep them? Do you have a publisher? Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my opinion is always that you should keep your copyright, 100%. Like it is something that gets signed away far too frequently, I feel, in video games, because especially there's like not a union, for game composers to really kind of, guarantee those rights. And so it really is up to the individual contracts, the individual agreements with publishers, with game developers, to make sure that they understand the importance of copyright and retaining rights on things. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing for those people that you're working with. Like you can say like, okay, well, if I signed away my rights, this increases my rate because, this has value. I can't just give this to you for free. Like this is something that is negotiated. And so, for example, like when I was being approached by Mojang and Microsoft to work on Minecraft, Microsoft did require the rights to be signed to them. But I said, okay, well, this is my rate for that. And, we were able to negotiate something that worked out for both of us and, to get some amount of royalty share on that. But it really was that process of negotiating that I think actually was able to guarantee that. But everything else, like every indie project, I retain soundtrack rights, copyright, to self-release my music or work with a publishing partner for the music, depending on the project, depending on the interest. And I think that's a really important thing to keep a hold of, especially as a composer working in games.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for your wonderful talk, Lena. I was just wondering to both of you, I find myself becoming extremely listless when I don't have a project I'm working for and making music for, and struggle with a lot of anxiety posting my own work when I'm not linked to a project. Is this something you two deal with, and how do you deal with that? Because to me, putting myself out there is extremely scary at times.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead on this one.
Rinse and repeat. I'm not sure if that's a real answer. I also struggle with this. I don't have a real solution for myself. I guess a lot of us are faced with a lot of anxiety in presenting ourselves to the world. But I just try to put myself aside, a little bit to the side, and I think of it a bit. I'm not sure exactly. That's a very bad answer. What about you, Lena?
Well, I think honestly, dealing with the anxiety of being perceived is always a constant threat, especially with the internet of, just like, am I going to be judged? Am I going to be, taken seriously for what I'm doing? But like, honestly, it really just comes down to just doing it, just getting a SoundCloud account or whatever and just posting everything. It doesn't have to be great. Like if something hits, it hits, but like putting it out there, getting it out there, I think is the most important thing to really just build up that body of work and build up that recognition of like, this is the kind of stuff that you do. And it's hard to be on the receiving end of like, you just go over your anxiety. It's like it's not that. It's like it really is sort of coming from a place of like finding the joy in sharing that stuff and finding a community of people that receive it. I think is a really important part of that. And for me, a lot of my anxiety with sharing music that's not attached to a game has really come from finding like-minded composers, finding like-minded artists, and building up that rapport, and like everyone's cheering each other on. Like, find that group of people, find that community that you can sort of be releasing music in, because they're gonna love it. Anytime you come up with something new, they're gonna be like, oh, this is sick, this is so cool. And then you can respond to their stuff, and really it really just kind of creates this good atmosphere, I think, that helps foster creativity in the long run.
I like that about the online community. I feel like you can find so many great connections with people you never would have expected because of the internet. It's fantastic. Yes.
I think we're out of time, so I want to thank you with a super quick question. You can't describe it or anything. You just have to say the VST or plugin you can't live without. Just the name of it.
Valhalla Reverb.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
Ping pong.
All right. And with that, I say thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited to talk more later on.
Yeah.
It was really nice to meet you.
Yes,
yeah, good to meet you.
All right.
Giant
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, guys, for a great conversation. We've actually reached the end of today's program, but there's a couple of things before we say goodbye. And for you, Lena, the day is just still starting, I guess. Yeah.
Yep, time to have breakfast.
Yeah. We have 3 more Chaotica eyeballs to give out before you leave. But first, just want to briefly sum up some of the things we've been through today. Yeah, we have heard about how to adapt to new middleware and not be afraid to challenge boundaries, adapting to audio in Unreal Engine, and how animals, as well as humans, actually adapt their pitch to the acoustic environment, how PROs adapt to the games industry, more or less, or it goes 2 ways, maybe. How game developers must adapt to the audience's ever-increasing expectations, and how the audio has to sound real when things start to look photorealistic. How we adapt our writing style based on our own history with game music, and how we adapt to the imposter syndrome as well. Yeah, and also we have to thank the people following the conference from home. We have had 80 people following the conference today, which is a new record for GACO, so it's growing.
Great.
Thank you. And then we, of course, have to thank our speakers so much. Please give them another round of applause. Thanks to Cinemateket and our volunteers and sound guys, our co-presenters, sponsors, and supporters. And thanks to you for coming. Yeah, let's do the Chaotica thing. Okay, I have some names here. No, don't throw it. First one is Anders Hannigan. Oh, yeah. And then we have Claudia Cox.
Really? Okay, cool. Thanks.
Oda Tilseth. Oda is not here. Okay.
Oh.
Lisa Bråten. Okay, then it's time for some mingling and bar and stuff. hope you hang around a bit longer, and I hope to see you again tomorrow as well to kick off the weekend with some more audio talk. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yep. Cool.
Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna head off the call now.